Welcome to the special Halloween episode of the Deceneus review. And you're listening to this on what should be the 31st of October, the most liminal time of the year, the time where, summer really officially ends and the winter holiday season begins. And I thought that would be a fantastic side episode so we can talk about all things horror and spooky and weird and eerie. And I did want to talk about Halloween because Halloween has a kind of a, I wouldn't say super special place in my heart, but it's up there. It's a holiday that I didn't discover until I was 7 years old when I moved to the United States. And as a little kid, I was introduced to my first Halloween by my mom and dad's friends, and I I was amazed by it, all the costumes and the characters and the parties. And I remember that my first ever Halloween outfit, I was a Ghostbuster, and I had this custom homemade Ghostbusters outfit that a friend of my mom's made for me. And then I got to go drop into their big adult Halloween party where everybody went all out and wore all kinds of costumes. And it was just a very, strange, bizarre, um, kind of liminal experience for a 7-year-old boy that just moved to the United States. And ever since then, it's kind of held a somewhat special place in my heart. Unfortunately, this year, I'm looking outside my window right now, and I have no decorations out. For whatever reason, I'm just not feeling anything this last few weeks. I didn't bother to unbox the inflatable giant Harry Potter characters I usually put out that I got from my daughter a few years ago. None of my purple lights, none of my orange lights, none of my weird cats and skulls and fog machines and all the stuff I usually have out. I don't know, I just didn't feel like it. A big, a big reason was that when I did set time aside, it just happened to coincide with the recent hurricane that came through, so that kind of got delayed and life kind of got in the way. But honestly, I just don't feel like it this year. And most of the houses in my neighborhood are equally low effort. There's a kind of a level of just, I don't know, malaise in the air, it seems. Compared to the last 2 years, the front yards of everybody looks absolutely lame. Even Home Depot, which has become the Halloween store nowadays with all their giant skeletons and animatronic type things for sale, seem to be kind of lame and like underwhelming overall. So I don't know if that's a byproduct of the election coming up or just the overall economic kind of downturn that we're experiencing, but it does feel a little bit lamer. I'll probably end up pulling everything out tomorrow after I record another episode of the podcast and inflate the things real fast, have them ready to go for trick or treat. My daughter has a costume already. I don't, for the first time in a long time. But we'll probably go trick or treating and have kids over and stuff and hand out candy, and then I'll go to sleep and go to work. But I find Halloween a fascinating holiday because, well, modern Halloween is really commercialized. It's almost as bad, if not worse than Christmas. It's become a highly plasticized, highly advertised holiday where it's become about spending the most money. There's a little bit of a Griswoldian magic to it in the same way Christmas lights and Christmas house decorations used to be, but now Halloween has kind of taken over, and it seems like over decorating your house and over decorating your lawn, causing building little labyrinths in front and little displays for people to come see, has become very similar to a signifier of wealth, coolness, and the lack of children, so you can afford to do that kind of stuff. I remember the one of the biggest Halloween decorated neighborhoods I've ever experienced was Liberty Heights in San Diego, which is real close. It has a very high gay population, so there was a bunch of kind of wealthy gay men that had nice houses and would go all out with the Halloween like kind of kitsch. And I think Halloween more so than Christmas lends itself to that horror show kitsch, that whole insider kind of cult B movie vibe that allows people to spend a lot of money and over show their ability to be into something. It's got a Funko Pop kind of vibe to it that the other holidays don't. But I mean, Halloween's not just about that though. Halloween, I think, and what attracts me to it is the fact that while yes, it does focus a lot on horror and the macabre and all sorts of literary and film references, ultimately it's about liminal spaces, and it's a time where you put on a costume and recreate some sort of ancient ritual in a way, whether it's a traditionally ancient Christian ritual, which tends to be the assumed accepted origin of Halloween, with a mix of old Celtic and Gaelic rituals like of that different area. But it's not just unique to that area because all over Europe you have kind of proto Halloween celebrations or saints days, like all in the Catholic Church specifically. But they all kind of signify crossing the veil, having a liminal moment where on Halloween night, on that evening of the 31st, as it approaches the 1st of November, the thin passageway between here and the afterlife or the spirit world or whatever you may have thins, and then you yourself put on a mask and become something else. And you experience, if you do it right, you experience what Mircea Eliade calls a hierophany, which is feeling the sacred in the mundane. So for one night, whether it's at a party, on a street with fog machines going off, or in the streets with the cold weather of the coming winter, you experience a little bit of liminality, a little bit of that, numinous feeling that's outside the regular normal. And that's really helped out by the fact that you don't have a face most of the time. You're wearing a costume and you're treating each other very differently. Even when you're going to like parties where you're getting drunk, it almost feels like you become the characters for just a little bit. And that right there is what makes Halloween interesting. And it's very interesting compared to other holidays because of this. But today I invited one of my friends and friend of the podcast, multiple time guest. This is her third time on, Lisa Kuznak, author of horror, science fiction, weird westerns, and all kinds of other cool stuff. Lisa Kuznak, welcome back.
Hello, hello. Glad to be back.
All right. So you are Canadian. Do you guys do how do you guys do the Halloween thing in Canadian?
Pretty much identical to Americans. It's not too different up here.
How do you feel about it? Are you a Halloween person or no?
Oh, big time. Our whole family, like for us, it's about the costumes. My husband and I every year put way too much effort into our kids' costumes. This year's actually the first one where my oldest isn't dressing up, and it's like, oh, it almost makes me want to cry because like every year since he's been born, either I've made his costume or my husband's made his costume. There's been a couple years where we bought them for one reason or another, but costumes are a big thing here. So we don't really decorate too much because our neighborhood, there's not a lot of kids in our neighborhood. There's been a couple years where we've decorated and then we wound up getting like 2 kids. So we don't even trick or treat in our own neighborhood. We drive them over to their grandmother's neighborhood there.
That seems to be a very common
Yeah.
thing. So I'm fortunate in living in a kind of a subdivision kind of area, like the way South Carolina, this area is set up. It's just a bunch of individual neighborhoods, and they all have names, and each neighborhood does its own little competing thing, kind of. And mine, in the last 2 years, tended to be pretty good. Where I grew up, though, in California, I lived in an area of mostly condominiums, but
Hmm.
next door, like a block away, was where these big, expensive houses were. And that's where everybody trick-or-treated, and, up and down the
Hmm.
streets of these expensive houses. And some of the houses, like, they're the cool houses that give out like, the full size Snicker bars or symphony bars and stuff. None of that
Hmm.
bagged shit. These guys were giving out like, chocolate bars and, cool stuff. And of course, like all things in California, they get ruined because people from further and further neighborhoods started coming and then causing fights and, just
Hmm.
fucking shit up. And that tended to stop. And it turned into one of those like, no, all we do is trunk or treat, or all we do is Halloween at the churchyard type of thing. And that's
Yeah.
sad for everybody, but
Yeah,
it is what it is.
when I was in Southern Ontario, which is far more populous in a kind of like the city I lived in was like the same population size as my hometown, but it was far more compact. And everybody would just take their kids to the mall. It was so weird. And so I remember trying to do the neighborhood around the mall because I lived close enough to it the very first year we lived there, and it was just so weird. And another difference too is that a lot of people think that like, oh, Southern Ontario's in Canada, it gets cold. It does get cold, but it's a different kind of cold. So I'm used to snow on Halloween up here. Like it's totally normal. Down there, I remember the first Halloween that I celebrated in Southern Ontario, it was like slush. It was like wet and gross. So not really great for walking around in. So I don't know. So then we ended up going into the mall and then like they were handing out candy like at the stores and I had never done this before. It was so bizarre to me. Like I'm not even like knocking. I'm not even having to say trick or treat and you're just giving me candy. Like it was
That
very
is
strange.
that is different.
Yeah.
Do you guys do the trunk or treat thing or whatever?
I, up here, I think there are, but it's really not that common. There's just a couple neighborhoods that just get all the kids, and then the rest of the town is
Kind of like whatever.
kind of, yeah, whatever about it.
Yeah, there's a few houses in my neighborhood where they go all out. Like this one
Mhm,
guy, kind of like the corner of my street, him and his wife, and he's got I think one kid, like a little kid. And this guy
mhm.
goes all out. I mean, he just wilds it out when it comes to the decorations. Like right now, if you walk there, it's like a haunted house in front of his house.
Yeah.
And they usually host like a block party for
Mhm,
Halloween, and they have all kinds of stuff for all the kids. So everybody shows up at his house. It's like the starting point to like the trick or treat, basically, which is really
mhm.
cool because you're like, okay, this is cool. I wish I had the neighborly spirit and energy to do this, but I don't. But I think it's really cool. I
Mhm.
I I like Halloween, and like like your son, I had an era of whatever. I don't want to do that. It's
Mhm.
dorky, and I
Yeah,
kind
that
of
teenage thing, right?
yeah, I
Yeah.
kind of quit that, and then I realized that Halloween parties are like really trashy and slutty, and it's fun to get drunk
Yeah,
in
he's not
costume.
there yet.
And then it
Thank
comes
Christ.
back. Okay, so don't worry
Yeah.
about that. Like it will come back. All right, like because I had that era where I was like, oh, I'm too cool for this shit, and then like all of a sudden
Yeah.
I was like, wait a second, there's a
Hmm.
party and everybody's dressed like Snow White,
And
but
girls are
slutty.
here. Oh my
You know,
goodness.
do you remember? Because you and I are like the same age almost. There was like the
Just
era
about.
in the 2000s or so, or 2010s, where like
Hmm.
every party and every costume was like something but slutty. Do you
Yeah.
remember
I
that?
mean, it's yeah,
It's
it's
probably
bad.
still
It's
like
still bad.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, and I remember that we're like, okay, I'm gonna go hang out with like, the Mad Hatter, but slutty,
Yeah.
or like whatever. And like that was fun. That was
Yeah.
like the
That
revitalized.
wasn't my thing. I was the one wearing like still wearing like the scary-ish, I wasn't into that scene. That wasn't my bag. I had friends who did that though. Power to them.
Yeah, I am. What was your last year's Halloween costume, if I may ask?
As a kid,
No,
so
last year as an adult.
oh, it was just a zombie. Like it was just really generic zombie shit. But that was a lot of fun.
I was Mr. Flanders.
Yeah, just covering yourself in gore and the problem with Northern Halloweens though,
It's cold,
the
huh?
more it's cold, the more gore you have, the cold air really it freezes the fake blood on you, right? So it sucks. And the same thing, like when you're planning kids' Halloween costumes, you have to plan with all their added like snowsuits and shit underneath the regular costumes. So there's certain things that are really hard to do until they're a little bit older and they're okay with being a bit cold.
Right.
So you always have to plan their costumes with the thoughts that they're going to be wearing layers underneath, which is
Yeah, and
sometimes funny. It sometimes winds up being really funny.
I never had that problem being in California.
Yeah.
I mean, it does get cold.
Yeah.
You got to put on like a sweater, but it's always a sweater. It's never like
Well,
a snow jacket.
well, speaking of the difference between Canadian Halloween and American Halloween, is every Canadian child on the in this nation is watching American Halloween movies filmed in California and thinking, man, I wish I could just wear almost nothing for Halloween. That'd be great.
Right. I mean, that's
We're
interesting.
also
Yeah.
jealous.
Yeah. Like, enjoy your cold, Canadians. But no,
Yep.
I mean, I feel you. I mean, my rules for costume were always like, can I drink and can I smoke? All right.
Yep.
Because if you get like a mask or something weird, you can't drink and you can't smoke, and then there's no point in wearing that to a Halloween party because you're taking it off. Like it's like, whoa,
Hmm.
whoa, whoa, I can't drink and smoke, can't, gotta go. So I always preferred the less stuff as possible.
Hmm.
So last year I was last minute kind of decision. I was Mr. Flanders. So
Hmm.
I committed to the bit. I grew an actual real mustache. I think I'll post a picture of my Mr. Sanders outfit.
Nice.
Mr.
I don't have
Flanders.
any
Oh my
pictures
God,
of it.
Mr. Flanders. I'm talking about the Simpsons character.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then for the usual, I've done all the usual stuff. Nothing too crazy. But I do have kind of an eerie Halloween story, which is kind of weird, right? So,
Hmm.
I always talked about like the liminal and the bizarreness of Halloween. When I was, I believe, a freshman in high school, we were out like being hooligans with a bunch of friends, kind of trick or treating, but like tongue in cheek, sort of like half-ass costumes, which is probably like your son's mood is right now, but that's how we were.
Hmm.
And as we were walking through the neighborhoods, we ran into this is myself and a bunch of both male and female friends. We ran into this other girl that was kind of like an acquaintance, and she was dressed like a really weird alien. Like she was all silver, like a very like David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust type of thing going on, right?
Hmm.
And she ended up hanging out with us, and she was somebody I kind of knew, but not really. But she was the doppelganger of a friend of mine, right? Which is really weird. Like, you know what I mean? By a doppelganger, she looked like her and
Hmm.
could be her. They were like very
Yeah.
similar. Everybody used to, when they were in school together, people used to confuse them as sisters.
Hmm.
And their names both started with the same letter and kind of sounded the same. Well, she kind of ran to her out of nowhere. She kind of popped up, like, what the fuck are you doing?
Hmm.
She kind of was like tagging along with us. And either way, like we ended up like partying and like I made out with her or whatever. It was very like teenage California Halloween thing.
Hmm.
And the next day, I never saw her really, and I never talked to her. And a decade passed, right? Like I completely forgot about it. And many years later, I'm at a bar, and she once again pops up out of nowhere. And I have, this was like I would say 1998 the first time this happened, and then this maybe even earlier, and then this was like around 2010 that I run into her again. So quite almost a good amount of time, right? And it was weird, and she was like strangely like connected to a friend of a friend's friend. She was his girlfriend, and it was all this drama, and she ended up there was like a scene and stuff, whatever. But we ended up giving her a ride home, and I never saw her again, like, at all. And then a year later, a friend of mine goes, "Hey, do you remember that girl that like we used to go to school with? And she was at that Halloween party when we were like little kids. And then we ran into her at the bar again. Well, check this out." And she sends me like this newspaper like article, and she actually fell and died, or was pushed and died off the Queen Mary, the really haunted ship in Long Beach,
Oh,
California.
no
If you
way.
remember that.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, that's so freaking weird." Like I have this like triple connection where I've only really spent that twice in my entire life with this person. And then
Hmm.
she ends up, it's all like Halloween related, and then she dies
Hmm.
in a bizarro murder slash possible suicide thing. And it's
Weird.
that's my weird Halloween story. That's all I got. But
Hmm.
definitely connected. But let's talk about horror here now, right?
Hmm.
I mean, okay, so your novel, oh my God, Palace. That's a
Yeah.
horror novel. It's science fiction, but it's really a horror
It
novel.
has horror elements
Horror
in it.
elements.
Yeah.
So, what do you consider yourself a horror writer? Do you write horror elements,
Um,
or what do you think?
well, I wouldn't consider myself a pure horror writer. And if you look at some of the reviews that Palace has gotten from horror readers, you can kind of understand why I hesitate to do that because there's and that's the problem with cross genre stuff is that
Hmm.
the science fiction readers maybe think that there's too much horror or whatever, and the horror readers think that there's not enough horror, whatever, right? So, I wouldn't say that I am a horror writer, but I am very influenced by a lot of dark stuff. I always have been. I've always been attracted to the darker side of life, whether it's
Right.
pure horror or if it's like true crime or like that sort of shit. But and I have ever since I was a little kid, I've always been attracted to weird stuff. I was that weird kid. When I was in grade six, I don't know if you guys had to do this, but starting at about grade 4 or 5, we had to do speeches. So we had to write our speeches and then actually like say them in front of the class as like a practice for like public speaking, I guess.
No,
Whatever.
we're too dumb for that in the United States.
Well, uh yeah, so when I was in grade six, I did my to kind of explain the context, I was living kind of in not in a thrift shop, but like behind one. And my mom ran the thrift shop. Anyway, so I was exposed to all sorts of like random shit. And one of these things was like I was going through the boxes and boxes of books that we had that I had access to. And I found this like it was almost like a those coffee table books, but it
Hmm.
was all about serial killers.
Nice.
So I did my speech on serial killers. And how old are you in grade six? Like 11, 12?
Yeah.
That
Preteen.
sort of age. Yeah, too young to be talking about Jeffrey Dahmer eating body parts. And right when my teacher was like, "Okay, Lisa, go back to your desk." I'm like, "Oh yeah." And they found they found a severed penis in a kettle, and I'm like 11 years old. Oh my gosh. Every time I tell that story, I just crack up laughing. Holy shit.
That's
So I've always
beautiful.
been into that sort of that
So
sort of
wait,
stuff. My mom,
where was the severed penis?
I think it was, if I remember right, it was like found in like a kettle, like on the stove or something.
Oh, the Dahmer thing or
I
whatever?
might be remembering
Yeah.
wrong, but
No, I think you're right.
that was, yeah, that was one of my little factoids. I had to end on that note. And of course, the entire classroom of preteens just erupted into like, "Oh my God, you said the word," right? So
You're
it's
like
just,
penis. It's like the Beavis and
yeah,
the Beavis and Butthead episode. You ever see that
yeah,
one where they're
yeah,
not allowed to like laugh during sex ed and they're
yeah,
like
exactly,
fucking about to
exactly. It was
blow
so
up?
good. It was so good. That's like one of my favorite school memories is my speech on serial killers.
Like
Yep, that was pretty
the
good.
social worker shows up at your house that evening. They're like,
I am shocked they didn't, to be
like, oh,
honest.
this
Yeah,
is a girl. Or, it's probably gonna be my kid.
yeah,
Okay, like my kid's
yeah.
probably gonna be like talking about severed heads and stuff. You know what's
Oh my
interesting?
gosh, it's great.
So real close in Savannah, the town by my house, the city by my house, they
Hmm.
have this museum called the Grave Face Museum. It's a privately
Hmm.
owned collection of like horror, true crime, murder, occult, satanic memorabilia. Right.
Nice. Yeah.
And I mean, they got like all kinds of crazy shit in there. Like
Hmm.
downstairs, they have a bunch of like weird taxidermy of like two-headed goats and crazy shit. A lot of voodoo stuff from the South because it's in Savannah. So they actually found like in the building that they're in, they found like a bricked up room with all kinds of voodoo shit from like 200 years ago in there.
Nice.
And that's on display. They've got a bunch of old Church of Satan stuff. They have all like a bunch of those Kool-Aid packets from Jonestown. They have his pair of his sunglasses, a lot of like O.J. Simpson like crime scene memorabilia and like pictures from the police. But
Hmm.
their like pride and joy, their main like attraction is that they are the largest collector of Jeffrey Dahmer's art that he did,
Nice.
all this
Yeah.
crazy unhinged clown stuff he did in prison. And the
Yeah.
guy that owns the museum, he bought on auction everything that was in Jeffrey Dahmer's cell when he died.
Hmm.
So they have like a recreation of like his prison cell, and it's like you look at some of his art and you're like, "Ugh, it feels weird," it's just icky.
Hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
it's unsettling.
Yeah.
Of course, I went there with my 6-year-old, and I only took her through like half of it. Mostly
Hmm.
the weird animals and stuff. And then we got to the top, and I'm like, "Yeah, you can go ahead. You can look at the Tanya Harding skate, but no,
Yeah.
we're not going to go into the
Tanya
OJ."
Harding skate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they had her skate.
Yeah.
We're going to go ahead and pass on the Jeffrey Dahmer crime scene photos and the OJ Simpson murder stuff. So we kind of
Hmm.
turned around, but we got to do the Church of Satan goats and weird cult
Nice.
stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, oh, but they also have this huge collection. They have this room, and you probably would love this. They have this
Mm.
room of horror and metal pinball machines.
Nice.
Like it's
Yeah.
just this
That would
room.
be a lot of fun for
It's
sure.
every metal and like punk rock themed like pinball machine, but like
Yeah.
horror themed like Frankenstein, all this crazy,
Hmm.
retro type stuff. And they're just all in there, and you can just play pinball for free all
Yeah.
day if you wanted to, which was
If
pretty
you
damn
oh,
cool.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say, if you ever find yourself in the Canadian side of Niagara Falls, take your daughter to Madame Tussauds. I think
Like
that's how you
the
pronounce it. Madame Tussauds. Madame Tussauds.
the
Anyway,
the
whatever. It's a
wax
wax
place.
museum.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool. And if it's still there, now I'm thinking back to around that same age range. I think I was in grade 5 when my dad took me to Niagara Falls. And he took me to Madame Tussauds, and the whole basement was nothing but like as soon as you walk down the stairs into the basement on the left hand side, and I remember this really vividly because this blew my mind. There was like a wax thing of like Marie Antoinette's severed head, and then you keep going, and there's an electric chair, and you can actually like pull the lever down, and like the wax guy like goes back and forth, and he screams, "Ah, no, I'm getting electrocuted," whatever.
Nice.
So that was a lot of fun. And then you keep going, and it's all like medieval torture. And there was one I remember really vividly where it was a type of Chinese torture where they grease a steel pipe up above a stove, like a stovepipe. They grease
Hmm.
it and they tie it to it and they make you climb it. And then there
Oh,
was another one where it was like ripping the fingernails off. And like it was so gory and gross. And my dad's taking me to this. And I think my dad was more disturbed at this than I was. I thought it was cool as shit. I thought it was really awesome.
he's
And
like,
then there's
oh,
another museum. Um, there was another wax museum there too that he had to take me to, speaking of true crime, and it was specifically just for like gangsters and stuff. So you could see like wax museum style recreations of like Al Capone's like jail cell and like the Bonnie and Clyde car and stuff like that. You see their like bullet riddled corpses and stuff. I don't know if that place is still there because this is the late 90s when I visited. So I don't know
right.
if it's still there, but if it is, if your daughter gets a kick out of that shit,
Yeah, I mean,
take her to Niagara Falls.
she's got a morbid
Yeah.
thing going on. But that's interesting is what, with horror is probably out of all the genres one of the most popular ones. And okay, so
Hmm.
look, I hate genres, right?
Yeah.
I understand why genres are important for a, catalog kind of situation where like, I want to read something, so let me find a genre. And some genres are, but they're mostly ill-defined. And
Hmm.
horror, I always feel like it's something, you have horror and mystery as genres, but really you don't really have horror and mystery. You have supernatural monster stories and police style procedurals. That's what you're really saying when you're saying a mystery, right? Or like whodunits. But ultimately, can science fiction not be horror? Absolutely, right?
Hmm.
I mean, what is Alien but a science fiction horror? Is Alien the movie?
Absolutely.
Is
Yeah.
Alien the movie a horror movie, or is it a science fiction movie, or is it
Hmm.
both? Right?
Same with the first Terminator. That's another
Right.
one. That's
I
really
think
genre bending.
absolutely, and I think the first Terminator is the best one specifically because it has horror elements.
Hmm.
The latter Terminators, like Terminator 2, is like a science fiction buddy dad
It's
movie.
action. So
Right.
the same thing happened with Terminator as with Alien.
Right.
So the first one is very horror influenced, and then the second one becomes action because what can you do with the horror? And that's like speaking of Palace, a lot of people have asked me like, are you going to do a sequel? And I always think like I could, but it'll probably be a different genre because
Right.
how do you extend the horror without it becoming overdone and schlocky, right? Like if you look at these horror franchises, like
The schlock.
Halloween or
Yeah.
Freddy, yeah, and you're basically just watching it. for the kills at that point. Like I have a ton of friends. Actually, my brother-in-law is so hugely into horror movies that he actually has a band that is horror movie themed. Like that's what they write their music about. He's covered in tattoos of like, Voorhees and Michael Myers and all that stuff.
Right.
Really, really into it. And a lot of the things that people watch these movies for is for the special effects.
And the
They like
aesthetic.
seeing and the aesthetic and like well, as far as women watch it more for the escape. Can she get away, right?
Right.
Um, Men watch it for lots of reasons. Same with, women watch it for lots of reasons too, but that's one of them. Like, can she escape? And then but a big thing in the community is like the special effects, like the kills, the gore and all that stuff. Because it's a safe way to explore it, right?
Right. Well,
But
so yeah, go ahead. Finish what you're gonna say. I'm sorry.
oh no, that's okay. I'm just trying to remember where I came from because I kind of uh lost track. But where was I? Right. So for the sequel for Palace, it would wind up being a different genre because there's really I haven't satisfyingly thought of a way to extend the horror elements to a sequel. It would wind up being more of an action. And the same thing happens with Alien to Aliens and Terminator 1 to Terminator 2. And there's probably more examples than that, but those are the big ones.
Well, it's really the entirety of the genre. So ultimately, I think that there is the idea of horror, right?
Hmm.
Which I think that you can get real philosophical about what is horror, what causes you to be horrified, what causes you to be
Yep.
terrified, and experience this kind of like almost like liminal, weird and eerie kind of feeling and this fear, right? This,
Hmm.
or even better, dread. If you can, if a work of art can elicit dread in you, I think that is the ideal mode, right? But when you when that sort of stuff gets replaced by when it becomes okay. So I don't know if you're familiar with Mark Fisher, the philosopher. Mark Fisher was a British philosopher, a modern British philosopher, and he came up with a lot of really cool concepts that I think apply to, I try to work into my own fiction. But he wrote he committed suicide in like 2015 or 2016. But
Hmm.
he wrote a little book called The Weird and the Eerie. And The Weird and the Eerie really explores the concepts of horror in modern life and how modern life can be weird and eerie. And he really focuses on the type of horror that matches those points and what is the weird, right? But
Hmm.
something that shouldn't be but is, right? And then
Hmm.
what is the eerie? The eerie is more of a feeling of displacement or I shouldn't
Hmm.
be here. You see it in kind of now cliche, kind of overdone, but the whole idea of the liminal space, I'm sure you've heard about that.
Yep. Yep.
For you guys at home that have not heard about liminal spaces, a liminal space. So, okay, I'm going to review real quick because I think this is the interesting philosophy of horror. Liminality is a concept that comes from anthropology and the study of religion, whether it's from Mircea Eliade, from his Sacred and Profane, or from Genet, the French anthropologist. And liminality is that time in your life or that threshold between the past and the future, right? So when you're in a liminal space, right, you're in a transition. Right. So, for example, high school graduation can be considered a liminal space. Right.
Hmm.
Those feelings of, oh my God, it's over. I'm never going to see this place again. And you can think back to your high school graduation or those last days of school. You just spent four to 6 years if you're in a different type of school, right? In this place with these people, and you're walking around the hallways or the yards, and you're never going to see it again. Probably it's over, right? This period of your life is coming to an end, and you're
Hmm.
going through a ceremony, and the whole point of the ceremony is to be the door, right? It's the door between this place and this place. You
Hmm.
go to your graduation as a high school student, you leave as an adult, you know as a
Yep.
high school graduate. And but that week right before graduation, that's a weird week, right? I think back and it's been over something, 20, 25 years, right?
Mm.
And I think back on it, and it is a weird time where you're like, oh, I'm never going to see these people again. Or some are going off to college, some are going off to the army, some are going off to whatever, And it's an odd feeling, right? You get the same kind of feeling, graduating college, for guys in the military, leaving a place. I always found myself specifically like, I remember when I left my patrol base in Afghanistan after being there for like 7 months, and living there and eating there and, living in a kind of safe space for, 7 months, and I remember going on that like last patrol outside the wire, and I realized, man, I'm never going to see this place again. I'm never coming here again. I'm never going to live here. I lived here. I might not see these guys again. And it was such a
Hmm.
weird kind of feeling, right? And horror, I think, in the weird, which is something that should not be, really at its best combines those two elements, right?
Yeah.
It combines that feeling of like, what is this? It should not be,
Yeah.
whether like, for example, the alien, right?
Hmm.
You know, and it puts it in weird liminal spaces in situations like in, on the Nostromo in space, or
Hmm.
even deals directly with it, right? But what happens in modern kind of genre fiction is that I think you have the idea of the horror, like the actual like emotional elements, and then you have
Hmm.
like the genre of horror or like the style of horror, which is
Yeah.
all the kitsch that comes along with it, right? And I mean,
Hmm.
look, growing up, I was into like metal and Marilyn Manson and goth music, and that horror goes along with that. Like, you
Hmm.
go into like every club, like goth or punk club, and it's like, Frankenstein, and you got the Misfits, which are like zombie, like, kind of like motifs. You got like not rockabilly, but psychobilly, which is like
Yeah.
zombie rockabilly, surf goth music. You've got like, I mean, the whole goth thing is all about like Halloween, like every day. Everybody like is into the Nightmare Before Christmas, right? Which is
Hmm.
really the Nightmare Before Christmas is a movie that really plays with liminality when you think about it, right?
Yes, it does. It really does. Yeah.
Right. It's even plays with the idea of doors and events and
Hmm.
time and like repetition of time and fucking up that element. That's what makes it nightmarish, is because it messes up that element.
Hmm.
But you have there's a whole slasher like kitsch thing, right? Where you're
Hmm.
not scared. When you watch a movie like a slasher flick, you're not scared of it. You're squeamish, maybe grossed out, but it's not truly. It doesn't elicit horror in you, right? I
Hmm.
always think that like you've seen the Exorcist.
Oh yeah. Actually,
Yeah, I
yeah.
would
I
just
I saw The Exorcist when I was like 9.
okay.
So
If you didn't see the Exorcist on a Halloween
yeah.
podcast, I'd probably hit delete right now.
Yeah.
It'd be like, what am I doing,
Yeah.
wasting my time here, right? But
Yeah. Exactly.
the scariest part in the Exorcist, right? Then this is I would say objectively, right? I'm gonna say this objectively. The scariest part in The Exorcist is not when Reagan gets all freaking possessed by Pazuzu and she's doing all the crazy head spinning and barfing and stuff, right? By that
Hmm.
point in the movie, it's kind of become not scary at all, right?
Hmm.
Now you're just trying to figure out if they're going to defeat the demon. That's where you're at, right? The
Yeah.
scariest part of the movie and the part that like freaking fried itself into my brain is when at the very beginning of the movie when they're having that party. You know what I'm talking about? They're
Hmm.
having a little
Yeah.
party and she walks out and she pees on the floor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's the scariest part of the movie because you're like, what the fuck just
Hmm.
happened, right? What's going on here? Or like, what, like, is she sick? Is she insane? Is she fucked up?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's the part where like, is she possessed by a demon? But I know that's stupid, right? And you're still in the zone where you're questioning yourself, right? Nothing supernatural has happened, at least nothing overtly supernatural. So it's like that's terrifying because that could happen in your own world,
Hmm.
right? It's something that happened that's out of place. Very, very weird behavior, right? Like that was a weird moment and an eerie moment because it was a normal party that just snapped right into the liminal when she peed on the ground and then said they're all going to die,
Yeah.
right? And that's terrifying because you're like, okay, now there's a threshold here. And then she spider walks down the stairs and that's really fucking creepy too, right? That's the other
Hmm.
part.
Yeah.
But seriously, by the time you get to that, it's become mundane. And
Hmm.
you deal with the same issue with like vampires and werewolves. right?
Yeah.
Like we all know vampires and werewolves. Vampires and werewolves are D&D video game bad guys now,
Hmm.
right? Because you know how you're going to defeat him. So any fiction with a vampire, well, they're going to do vampire killing things, and they're not scary.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
any fiction with werewolves, they're going to do werewolf killing things, and they're not scary. So when you
Mm.
write horror, you gotta, I don't know, it's a tough one because it's such an oversaturated market. And who are you appealing to? Are you appealing to the people that want the thoughtful kind of terror, the weird?
Yeah. There's all sorts of different subgenres.
Right.
There's a ton of them. Yeah. So like there's supernatural horror, so you're writing like ghost stories, there's psychological horror, there's my person one of my personal favorites is folk horror, which was a big influence on Palace as well. So like actually just the other day I rewatched Wicker Man, which is one of my favorite movies.
Right, because
But
your book
the
was
great
Wicker Man.
majority of that movie, yeah, the great majority of that movie is just building up. And you just slowly watching this guy just going, what the fuck, for like an hour and a half or whatever until the very end.
Right.
So most of that movie is just, okay, this is weird,
Right. And
This is
that's what
weird.
makes this that one that's what makes
Yeah,
it scary, right?
yeah.
Because it's weird and out of place. Like the weirdness in the horror doesn't come from oh my God, it's a monster with all these tongues and shit coming at you.
Yeah.
No, it's that it's a village,
Hmm.
on like a little island. It was on an island, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he's like, what's going on here? And weirder shit start happening until the
Hmm.
final explosion of like the to use those anthropological terms, the hierophany, right? The
Yeah.
entrance of the supernatural into the world of the natural.
Yeah. And the Wicker Man ritual itself, the Wicker Man is the liminal space because
Right.
it's transporting you from the land of the living to the land of the dead. The same thing with like, um, I can't give any examples off the top of my head for movies or books, but like water. So wells, bogs, rivers,
Right.
lakes, they've all throughout history have been considered these liminal spaces. And that's why, we find bog bodies and shit, which I'm so fascinated by that. It's really, really interesting stuff.
That
But
is
yeah,
interesting
so
stuff. I think
it's
they
there,
recently dated another one, and they like redated it or something. I think there's some interesting articles on bog
yeah,
bodies.
yeah, super, super cool stuff. Um, but yeah, so there's that liminal space element in Wicker Man as well. So there's lots of and you see it in um like The Witch and Midsummer or Midsummer, however you want to pronounce it, whatever. They all
I
have
did
that
not love that
element.
one. I did.
Um, yeah, if I were to either of those two A24 horror movies, I would go with The Witch. I
Me
really,
too.
really enjoyed The Witch.
Same
Yeah.
with Black Phillip. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
I told that story to my daughter as a bedtime story the other
Mm-hmm.
day. I obviously changed a lot of it, but
Mm-hmm.
Black Phillip has been a frequent visitor in my bedtime stories that I tell my
Yeah.
daughter.
Yeah. But he's so yeah, so the forest
Right.
is that liminal has that liminal quality.
The village.
The village. Yeah, so it's a really interesting, like weird psychological concept of transformation
Well, so when you think
that
about it, Halloween
yeah.
itself is that liminal space, right?
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, I don't know how the trees look where you are.
But they're changing.
But yeah, the leaves are gone off the trees here now. So most of the transformation was earlier in October. But just watching it go from brilliant green, summer, vibrant to these gorgeous, gorgeous shades of yellows and oranges and reds, and then just one weekend of strong winds and it's all gone. And now all the trees are bare.
Right.
Yeah. So it makes sense that this sort of holiday lands at this time of year. The same reason why Easter is a spring thing, like, rebirth and all that crap.
Right.
So
Right. Because look
yeah,
at you think of
it's a
the
holiday of transformation.
yeah, think of the symbols
Hmm.
of Halloween. The scarecrow, right? The scarecrow is made out of like old crazy corn, and it's an abandoned
Yeah.
kind of liminal creature. You
Hmm.
have pumpkins, which are like left to rot and kind of left around everywhere.
Hmm.
It's like it's you go out trick-or-treating at night and it's cold for the first time. It's usually like
Hmm.
when you think of like every fall, at least I do, I tend to think of like Halloween as like the time when like, oh, okay, I gotta get my sweatshirt out.
Yeah.
It's got a little chilly. It might be chilly trick-or-treating, guys, and that's when I always
Yeah.
have a memory of that feeling of being cold. And any minute
Hmm.
now the wind is coming. The ice
Hmm.
cream man, my Sunday enemy when I record podcasts. I was talking to him on Sunday, and he's like, "Well, this is my last day until March,"
Yeah.
and it's like the week of Halloween, right? And
Hmm.
it's a complete changeover, and it is the
Hmm.
time when like the thinning of the veil, and then, we go from the end of harvest, which is like the the celebration of the growth and the life and the fruits of the living labors of March, the spring and the summer, to the entering into the season of death, right? The season of cold and the end.
Yeah.
And it does bring all kinds of like creativity and, writing itself is a very liminal kind of experience because you're connecting
Hmm.
the realm of the intellectual, creative subconscious with the living, through a
Yeah.
portal, which is the page, right? The book, the
Hmm.
laptop. So, yeah, I mean, it is cool like that. And, yeah, does kind of get buried in the slasher stuff and all that nonsense. But for the most part, there's a lot of really cool elements to it. Um, what, okay, what are some of your favorite horror novels?
So, I wouldn't say I've outgrown horror novels, but they hold a place in my heart that belongs to childhood. Like, um, I really cut my teeth on like, big kid books with Goosebumps. So all my girlfriends were all reading like Babysitter's Club and all that shit. I was obsessed with Goosebumps. I read just about every single one of them that
Which
was
one's your
published
favorite?
in the mid 90s.
Which one's your favorite?
The one that I can remember the most, let's
Yeah.
see, probably Say Cheese and Die, or the one with the ventriloquist dummy. What one was
Okay.
that? Oh, what
Sages
was
and
that
Dies,
called?
the camera
Yeah,
one that
yeah,
shows your death, right?
yeah. Or you take a picture of someone and they die.
Or
Actually, I
something.
don't remember. Something like that. Anyway, it was like haunted camera or whatever.
Right.
But so R.L. Stein was like the first. I was reading the Goosebump books, and then when I got a little bit older, I was reading like Fear Street and all that stuff. And then I was reading like V.C. Andrews and Christopher Pike and all that. I still remember. I've been thinking a lot lately about rereading Flowers in the Attic as an adult because I
Okay.
haven't read that since I was like 10.
I don't think
That's a
I've never read that one. I know what it's about. I've
Yeah,
never read it though.
yeah. I don't remember it enough, and that's why I'm like, I should probably reread it.
That's the
Should
one that kind of
probably
has
reread it.
that weird incest kind of thing to it. Oh, I think
Yeah,
okay, I'm thinking the right one.
it
Okay.
does. So,
Okay.
also the cover was really cool. It was one of those like, I miss these covers so much. You used to see them in the 90s and like from 80s paperbacks too all the time, where it's like there was a hole in the cover and you could see her face, and then it was like in a house or whatever, and then you open that up and there was like a second image underneath the cover, like
Hmm.
I don't, there's a name for that, I don't remember what it's called. Anyway, so that sort of shit was really cool, and you saw that on horror paperbacks like a lot. Actually, I have somewhere kicking around that, have you heard of that Paperbacks from Hell?
Yes, I
The guy
have.
published a book featuring all those like old horror
Yeah,
covers.
he
I have
goes to.
that.
It's like a kind of like a critical anthology, right? Basically,
Yeah,
he talks
yeah,
about it.
it's so good. Because that was the 80s was really peak horror literature.
Well, it's the same
it,
thing.
it
Same thing
really
with
was.
movies. Same thing with
Yeah.
movies, right?
So for whatever reason, and like you and I agree, but a lot of listeners probably will not agree. I'm not a Stephen King fan. I've read Stephen King, of course, because
You have
everybody
to.
who's into horror has read Stephen King. I can put up with his short stories,
I agree.
but his longer stuff just doesn't do it for me. There's something about Stephen King's voice that I just don't like. I don't know what it is. Not my thing. Um, I also have an anthology of his son's short stories. What does it go? What's his pen name? Joe Hill.
Joe Hill, yeah.
I like his voice better, but you can see
The
as you're
influence,
reading, he's
absolutely.
very influenced by his dad. Yeah.
Right,
I think
absolutely.
I haven't read anything more recent than the anthology that I have, so maybe Joe Hill's more recent stuff has his own more of his own flavor to it, or maybe not. I don't know. I'd have to read it. Um,
I'm with you on disliking Stephen King. We've talked
mhm.
about this in the past where I was like,
Yeah.
and I will give credit where credit's due, right? Stephen King does come up with some great stuff, and he does have the ability. He's a very imaginative uh, plotter
Hmm.
in a way. He does come up with some very interesting stuff. He's popularized a lot of ideas that,
Hmm.
were kind of out there originally. He took a lot of like he did that whole at his best is when he's really focused on horror meets kind of Americana thing that he tends to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah,
Um,
that's especially well, one thing that he actually does really well is he writes what he knows, which is kind of it. Some people might say it's a bit stale, but I think, it works for him where like everything's based in Maine because that's where he's from, right? So
right.
everything's based in Maine, but when you look at the landscape, like when I was about 20, my husband and I went on a road trip down through, and we were driving through Pennsylvania.
Mm,
And that landscape was just like, oh my God, I am in Sleepy Hollow,
right.
right? The way that the trees grow and bend and the hills and the fog. And it was just like, if I died here, it would just be the perfect scenery to be murdered. It was
Well, which
great.
which is also like
Yeah.
Lovecraft country, Vermont
Yeah, it
over
is. It
there,
is. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's Sleepy Hollow land, and
Hmm.
like lots of that New England kind of area
Hmm.
does really like inspire a lot of horror, a lot of
Yeah. So he's
vibes.
able to use the landscape vividly in what he writes, and it's really really effective. Like it's the same way that although it's not horror, but Cormac McCarthy is able to really evoke the Southwest and like
Cor-
the border areas because
Absolutely.
he's so familiar with it, and it works so well because he's in it, right?
Or
Like
Tennessee in his earlier novels when he's still writing in the South and he's still in
yeah,
Tennessee. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you know, King's really good for that.
He just he can't land. He can't stick the landings, okay?
Yeah, I was just gonna
That's the
laugh and
pro.
say a lot of his most like my personal favorite of his like movie adaptations are the ones that are actually the most stupid. Like I love Sleepwalkers. I don't care. A lot of people think it's a freaking dumbass movie, but I really loved Sleepwalkers when I was a kid. I
I
don't know
don't
what it was about it.
I've
Like
never
maybe it's just
seen
because I
that
like
one.
cats. It's worth it, but it's really stupid. I'm telling you, you're gonna watch it and you're gonna laugh your ass off. But I love it. I don't know. There's just something about it.
You know what book I read of
Uh,
his that I actually liked and nobody else likes? I like the
which
one
one?
with like the shit weasel and the aliens. Oh, Dreamcatcher.
Dreamcatcher. Yeah, I haven't
It's
read
like
that
the
one.
one where like the aliens come in the forest and the soldiers.
Nice.
Here's my problem with Stephen King, right? And
Hmm.
my problem with Stephen King is that first of all, he overrides. His stuff's too long. His stuff's too
Yeah,
long, and it's never
that's why his short stories work a lot better.
right. And I can remember some of his short, like The Mist. Novella length is like his sweet spot, I think, because The
Hmm.
Mist is one of his best. He wrote The Shawshank Redemption, which I think is he's almost better at his like non-horror stuff.
Hmm.
The Body, which is Stand by Me or whatever, I thought was a great little novella or whatever he wrote.
Hmm.
He wrote The Green Mile, which is kind of sappy, but whatever. He tends to stick those better. And then you get into shit like the Dark Tower, right? Which the first few Dark Towers
I
are
couldn't get into it. I
I,
tried.
I liked the first few Dark Towers, and then it just got stupid. You're like, okay, this is stupid. Like it's just, oh my God, it's just stupid. By the time I got to like all the bad guys were like Doctor Doom from Marvel and shit. I'm like,
Hmm.
you're just jerking off, dude. I don't want to read this.
It's like oh my gosh, was it was either Family Guy or South Park or The Simpsons? One of those is making fun of Stephen King. It's like Lamp Monster. You know the skit I'm talking about? Have you
Yeah,
seen it?
yeah, I
He's like
remember.
rah rah, and he's like attacking the agent or whatever with like a lamp because he can't think of any other
Yeah, you
ideas.
can't
And
you can't think of anything
yeah,
else. No, but
yeah.
and then his other main problem is that, and this is presupposition on my part, right? But you look at his biography, and this guy is a dude that was a lower class poor dude who um who like he was a starving teacher. He was basically broke and couldn't afford the rent the day his first novel sold, and he got his first paycheck, and it like saved his life. And that was for like I think Carrie. He got the movie rights
Hmm.
sold, and he exploded. And now he's a millionaire. He's like the
Yeah.
writer to aspire to if you're writing
Yeah.
horror.
If you go into
Uh,
the horror section at okay, Chapters is like Canadian Barnes and Noble. If you go to the Chapters horror section, it's like 90% Stephen King.
right, it's the same here. It's like and so and now and for a long time, I believe in the 80s and 90s, he got shat on a lot by like the writing
Yeah.
establishment.
Yeah.
All the snooty guys who thought they were, he wrote slop, he wrote schlock, he wrote pulp. He basically like the literary establishment just dumped on him. He was basically the same way. We look at the Twilight stuff right now,
Hmm. Yeah.
or the romantasy type of stuff written by like Sarah J. Maas or whatever. And but yet he captured a kind of a zeitgeist. He captured a
Yes, he
cultural.
did.
He rode a
Yeah.
cultural wave at the height of that horror era.
Yeah.
Him and Clive Barker and Peter Straub and those dudes.
Hmm.
But now he writes the same books over and over. And what he is now he's accepted by the literary establishment. Now he's fucking
Yeah.
Stephen King. He's
Yeah.
writing.
Everybody's kissing his ass. Yeah.
Everybody's kissing his ass, right? And his contempt for the same people that got him there, which is the
Hmm.
lower middle class
I
people,
think I do
disgust
think that
me.
that is part of his voice, that it is very I don't know if patronizing is the right word, but you can really read it
No,
in his
absolutely.
writing that
Yeah,
he's just constantly shitting on like lower class Americans, and it's just like, okay, well,
right. He
thanks, I guess, you know.
like disgust at the
Yeah.
people that brought him up, the people
Yeah.
that read his stuff in
Hmm.
the 80s and 90s, is just so unpalatable that it
Hmm.
grosses me out, right?
It's very bitter. It just
It
has
is
this like
very bitter.
bitter flavor on your
Right.
tongue when you read it.
In a way he comes off as very similar to those like rich academic black dudes like Ta-Nehisi Coates who are accepted by the New York establishment, but then they
Hmm.
turn around and are bitter because now the lower class establishment turns their back on them, but they see themselves as a
Yeah.
champion of those lower classes. But I
Hmm.
read one of his recent novels. It was one that was made into an HBO show. It was the one about like kind of like a doppelganger type thing. It was so forgettable that I remember the name of it, right? It was one of the, not Doctor Sleep, but around that same era, like the Unknown or something. And I think the dude from Train Spotting was the main character in the TV show. Either way, so he goes to Texas for some reason in the novel, and he can't help but like shit on like Texans and Trump people and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Hmm.
dude, come on, man. Like
It's
you
low
don't.
hanging fruit,
Yeah,
like
you
if
don't
you,
have to like those people. They're or
yeah.
those chuds or whatever. But like now he like he snides and like, he's a fucking hick lib. To quote like Astral from Astral Codex, right? From not Astral Codex,
Hmm.
from Astral Flight Simulator podcast and Substack. Stephen King is the ultimate hick lib, right? He's a guy
Hmm.
that got shat on his entire life by the establishment. Now that he's accepted by establishment, he writes novels where he shits on the people that were his neighbors before. Because every one of the
Yeah.
bad guys is like the white rapist dad and blah, blah, blah. And he's got to
Yeah.
have like the magical black dude that has like the magic powers and he's like the healer and he's the good guy. Meanwhile,
Hmm.
like if you see a priest, he's a molester. If the character has a dad, he's a molester. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's like,
it
fuck
gets,
you,
yeah.
Stephen King, dude. Like
Well,
it's distasteful.
what's really funny about The Shining is that and this is a pretty widely known fact, I'm sure, but Stephen King hated the Kubrick adaptation, which I think
Right.
is the most Stephen King thing I could think of, because, well, for one, Kubrick did a much better job telling the story.
Of course.
But King was pissed off because it didn't go into like the father's all blah 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 blah. Like that was like the shittiest part of the book. I don't want to fucking read that. Like, I'm really sorry. Sometimes the stuff that we put in our books is
Right.
for our own sake, and not everybody else is going to get that. And so the fact that it was kind of changed made the movie better.
Oh,
Sorry to say,
the movie is one of Kubrick's best, and it's one
Oh,
of
it really is.
the best horror movies of all time because it
Hmm.
deals with that liminal space and time and
Yeah,
winter and all that stuff. And Kubrick actually understood the material, even though it came out of
yes,
Stephen Hitt's head.
yeah,
In a way, Stephen King doesn't understand his own material, you know? And
yeah.
I mean, that's an insane thing to say, but I think it's a fair thing to
It's
say.
true.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's my beef. That's my beef with Stephen King. You know what?
Hmm.
He might be a nice guy, but his like Twitter persona and his affectations of being like a New York guy now, and then as soon
Hmm.
as you have all his synco pants going like, oh my God, Stephen King, he's obviously right. I'm like, dude, come on, man. He
This is
literally
why
wrote,
I just don't pay attention
yeah.
to any famous person's social media. Like I just don't, because especially if I am a fan, I really don't need to see.
What is that?
I don't need to know everything about them. You know what I mean? All their opinions on everything.
Right, right. Like it does ruin the thing, you know? And
Hmm.
unfortunately, horror, like all the genres of writing right now, have the same obnoxious, like over politicization, you know? And
Hmm.
it's like, I don't mind politics and I don't mind current day politics in your stuff, right? But
Hmm.
it can't be fucking boring, you know? It's like, if your idea of injecting political opinions is the same as like the New York Times, you're just fucking boring. You know, it's just like, okay, I don't want to read
Yeah.
that, you know?
Well, that's like I don't usually do nonfic pieces on my Substack,
Mhm.
but as soon as I came back from the trip, I'm like, okay, I gotta get this thought out. And maybe it wasn't super coherent, but it's I don't remember what I named the post. I think just road trip thoughts or something like that. And I even said in there, like, if you're gonna attempt a let's say a great American novel or whatever, um, don't there you can examine politics, but don't insert politics. And I do think that there is a difference.
It absolutely is.
Inserting politics, it can alienate your audience or it can come across in a way you don't intend, or it can come off as like patronizing or just, like you're reading a book by like, some nosy aunt. Like it's obnoxious. Don't do it. You can examine, but my suggestion would be to not insert the politics.
Right. So my personal view, and I think you've seen this on Substack and how I joke around and stuff, is one, I don't take any of it seriously. I have a no current day politics rule. Like you'll never see me
Hmm.
talking about Trump or Kamala Harris or any of that stuff. I'll comment it when,
Hmm.
when it's pertinent and, whatever, right? But for the most part, I don't watch that stuff. I don't read articles about it. I don't care. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter to me in any way, shape, or form who's in charge or, because ultimately reptilians are in charge of us.
Yeah.
All right. So which breed
Like
of
they
reptile?
live,
Yeah,
speaking of
exactly.
herpes.
Which breed of reptile wins in next week? I don't care. Ultimately, they
Yeah.
both eat, adrenochrome and stuff, so it's
Yeah.
all fine, right? It's all fake and gay, to quote the great
What
philosopher
what
of
is it?
Twitter.
What is it? Blood from like umbilical cord blood
Yeah, I
or
don't know.
something?
Stem cells
Whatever. I don't
from
know.
aborted
I'm not up on
fetuses.
my yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not up on my
they're all fucking
research to see
vampires,
it.
right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, I don't care, and I find like and I feel like as an author and as as a artistic creator or whatever, I really like to just not to be outside that kind of veil, and maybe it makes me a coward. Well, fuck you, I don't care, right? But
Hmm.
ultimately, I like the fact that I can spend an entire week on Twitter. I mean, on not on Twitter, on Substack, getting shit on by these psychotic right wing guys calling me like a
Oh,
Jew
they're the best.
worshiper and
Yeah.
like how I'm like a tyrant of the slave to the Christian God or something, or and I'm just a filthy degenerate pornographer and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, guys, I guess I am the most liberal dude on the planet right now, right?
Hmm.
I'm literally like Larry Flint here, according to you,
Yeah.
And then I'll turn around and then, today I get attacked by a bunch of grandmas for Harris that I'm like a fascist and a fucking, Nazi sympathizer or something like that. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, so from one side, I'm like a Jew lover, and on the other side, I'm a Nazi. Like, either my
Yeah.
messaging
You
is
can't win.
I can't
Yeah.
win with these fucking people.
No.
And you know what, though? In a way, it makes me happy because it means that, like, my persona, my perspective, my liminal space, that my mask that I wear online, which we all wear a mask online, whether we admit it or
Hmm.
not, is incoherent enough to basically piss everybody off. And
Yeah.
ultimately, if I'm pissing you off, then at least I'm making you feel something.
I'd
So
rather piss everybody off than try to be friends with everybody because you cannot. It's so impossible to appeal to everybody on the internet. I would rather just piss everybody off.
I'm not
And
gonna
like I'm
appeal
not
to
out there
anybody.
picking fights or anything like that, but like, I'm not afraid to, tell people to fucking take their meds or whatever. I'm not beyond that.
Right, and a lot of people really should take their fucking meds on the internet.
Yeah.
Okay, like, can we please?
Including me. I should probably also take my meds
Oh,
that
it
I
just
don't take.
started pouring rain outside. It's crazy. Talk about liminal space right now. It's actually sunny
Mhm.
right now, but it's pouring rain,
It's it's cloudy and gloomy here.
which is
It's
cool. It's
perfect Halloween weather,
so
yeah.
you know what in the American South, I found out. Do you know what they call rain when it's sunny outside?
What do they call it?
They call it the devil beating his wife.
I have never heard that before. That's pretty
I've
cool.
never heard that until I moved here, and I looked it up. And
Yeah.
a neighbor of mine, oh, it's the devil beating his wife, and I'm like, okay, fucking
That's really
hillbilly,
cool.
But I
Yeah.
guess that's what they call it down here. And
Yeah.
yeehaw or yuntu or whatever the hell. I actually live in the most unsouth southern place. Most of the people that live out here are actually from Ohio, so they're from your
Hmm.
part of the world more than from south.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, let's piss them all off. It's like, look,
Yeah.
Fuck
Okay.
if you're not gonna
You
end up
can't be
in
friends with anybody.
if you're not going to end up in the concentration camp or the gulag on whichever side wins, then you're
Yeah.
probably wrong. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what, you know what, I don't want to belong with you.
Yeah.
Because to quote the great quote that I don't want to be part of any group that would have me in the first place.
Hmm.
But yeah, so okay, Goosebumps. You know what my favorite one is? I don't remember what it's called. You might remember this one. It's the
Hmm.
one where like the kid goes to like stay with his grandparents on some like beach, and there's this cave and there's
Yep.
ghost or something like that, Ghost Beach or something like that. Do you remember that one?
Yes, I know. I can think of the cover. I can think
It's
of the
it's
cover right
blue
now.
with like
Yeah.
a wraith thing on it.
Yes.
I like that one. He has like
Yep.
a friend, and the friend ends up being dead.
Yep.
That was a cool one. And then
Um,
Horrorland was cool too.
yeah. And then there was all the like choose your own adventures
Oh, those
and
are
all
the
that stuff.
best.
It was
Those are the
really, really
best.
fun. Fun little factoid. So the Goosebumps TV show was filmed in Toronto for the most part.
Like all those
It
kid
was
shows
about
were.
Yes. And so was, I don't know if Americans had the show because I'm pretty sure it was purely Canadian, but maybe you guys did. It's called Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Oh yeah, that was on
I,
Nickelodeon.
yeah, Are You Afraid of the Dark was so much. I remember the Goosebumps TV show was my first taste of like the book was better. The Goosebumps TV show was actually kind of corny to me as a kid, but Are You Afraid of the Dark was the one that I would actually watch to be scared. There are so many freaking good episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark that have stuck with me for all these years.
That's the one
They're,
where
yeah.
it opens with like the framing story of like the summer camp or something
The
like that,
Midnight
right?
Society, yeah.
Yeah. They all
Um,
sit around and each take turns telling a story or something like
that's
that.
right, yeah.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
it was on Nickelodeon here when I was
yeah.
a kid.
There was actually a lot of kids horror shows from Canada that I don't know if you guys got all of them, but there were a bunch. There was well, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Goosebumps. Um Freaky Stories.
Never heard of that one.
I'm pretty sure the Tales from the Crypt Keeper was animated in Canada.
I love Tales from the
Um,
Crypt.
oh my gosh, I'm forgetting so many. There was a ton. There was a ton. But yeah, so factoid time about Goosebumps. My husband actually auditioned for, or almost auditioned for a role in Goosebumps, but
But Ryan
because,
Gosling got it.
well, it might not have been the exact same episode, but yes, he did get his start on Goosebumps.
Right.
But because he lived too far away from Toronto, that he wouldn't have been able to get the role, but he was like kind of almost on Goosebumps, which is really, really
That
cool.
is awesome. So Ryan Gosling, was on the
Yeah, he
Goosebumps
got his start
episode
on
of
Goosebumps
Say
and Are
Cheese
You
and
Afraid of the
Die.
Dark?
It
Yeah.
was a Say Cheese and Die
Yeah.
episode, I believe.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And it's funny because speaking of Ryan Gosling, and I know I'm going a little bit off topic with horror, but like, so in Canada, we kind of were used to Ryan Gosling as being in these fucking dumbass kids shows like Young Hercules and like Breaker High. And so I thought he was just some fucking stupid teen actor, whatever. It took me until so Drive came out in 2011. I didn't see it until years later because I refused to believe that he was a serious actor. So I didn't see Drive till a few years after it came out. But when I finally watched that fucking movie, I was like, holy shit, this is not the same guy.
I
How is
love
this
that
the
movie.
same freaking guy? It is such an excellent Drive is one of my favorite movies. It made me really fall in love with the director, Nicholas Winding Refn, if I'm pronouncing it right. I'm terrible with names,
No,
by the way.
me too. But you are. No, Drive is great,
Yeah.
and Ryan Gosling is great.
Yeah.
You know, the actor that kind of has the same problem in a way is
Hmm.
Robert Pattinson, and
Yes,
you know
he suffered the same problem. Yeah.
he's suffering from the Twilight stuff. You know, and those movies
Yeah.
where I'm not going to say what I think about Twilight, or my wife is going to.
I've never watched a single Twilight movie. I've never read any of the books. So like I'm just
So
enjoy them if you do, I
I
guess.
bought
Not my
Twilight.
thing.
I bought Twilight at the height of like the hype, you know, and I was like, hey, I want to
Yeah.
see what this shit is about. And I think I got like
Mhm.
2 chapters in, and I was like, man, fuck this shit. And I just tossed it away. I was like, I can't
No,
do
yeah.
this. The movies aren't bad. I mean, they're schlock, and they're like,
Mhm.
girl romance schlock, whatever, you know. And Robert Pattinson is just, I mean, everybody's horrible in that movie. The only cool scene in
Yeah.
the whole movie is like this baseball scene where they play baseball, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But he's a great actor. You know, he's like this great.
Lighthouse is awesome.
Lighthouse is one of my
Lighthouse was
favorite
freaking
movies.
amazing.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Lighthouse is one of my favorite movies. He was in.
Speaking of weird liminal freaking like not quite horror, but like it is horror,
Right, exactly. That
The
the whole
Lighthouse.
thing is
Yeah.
like a head trip, and it's very
Mhm.
Lynchian in its like presentation. And then he was also, I mean, I personally liked him in Batman. I know a lot of people did not like the Batman or whatever. I liked
Mhm.
that Batman. I thought Robert Pattinson was a good Batman, and I
I haven't
liked the
seen it
way
actually.
it's very different than like before. And like, what'd you expect? Like, we want a different Batman. Do you want the same shit over and over? You know?
Yeah.
I'm also maybe not the best person to talk about Batman movies because I did not like the Michael Nolan Batman movies. I much
Mhm.
prefer the Tim Burton.
Yeah. The Tim Burton ones are definitely the best.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Tim Burton ones are just they're stuck with me, and I think
Yeah.
that old Beetlejuice does a much better job of being Batman than the Michael Nolan movies. I mean, yeah, the Joker was good, but it was too like clean, too polished. It lacked the weirdness that Batman should have. The
Hmm.
newest Batman though does a good job of that, and it does have this like late Gen X, early millennial vibe. It uses like a Nirvana song as kind of like a leitmotif throughout the entire movie. And I think that Robert Pattinson does a good job. He unfortunately is paired up with a poor Catwoman, right?
Hmm.
And then the movie, I believe the Catwoman is played by Zoe Kravitz, Lenny Kravitz's daughter. And she's probably a good actress on her own, but for some reason, Robert Pattinson did not have any chemistry with her. And when you think about
Mm.
it, like he lacks chemistry with everybody in movies, except maybe the mermaid statuette in Lighthouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's just kind of a guy that's kind of like bizarre and like
Hmm.
he's almost like incelly, but he's like a weird incelly kind of guy that's very attractive.
I think he should do more actually dark films, like not like Twilight, but like more like Lighthouse,
Right,
where
right.
it's adult dark, not
Eh,
like tween girl dark. You know what
Right,
I
and
mean?
he just that's what like he
Yeah.
he seems to lack chemistry with female actresses. I don't know what it is
Hmm.
about him. And because of that, he had more chemistry in Lighthouse than he did in Batman with Catwoman, and
Yeah.
there was supposed to be chemistry. I mean, he had more
Mhm.
chemistry in Batman with in Lighthouse with the little statuette than he did with Bella in the
Hmm.
entirety of Twilight.
Hmm.
You just don't buy him being into her. And that was the same
Yeah.
kind of with the problem with the Batman is like you just don't like you're like he's gonna go risk his life for her. He doesn't really even care about her. He has like no vibes with her. But he was in this movie called Good Times also, which was this I can't pronounce their names. Fendi Brothers movie or whatever, where
Mhm.
like he's got like a kind of like a mentally challenged kind of like autistic brother, and they rob a bank and all this crazy shit happens, and it's a serious action movie, you know, and he's really good in it. And I think that was I saw that movie before I saw both either The Lighthouse or Batman. I was like, man, this guy's pretty good, you know, like. And then of course he's in Harry Potter, and now everybody always forgets he's in Harry Potter. Have you seen the Harry Potters?
That's another one. I've never read a single Harry Potter, and I've never seen any of the movies. When Harry Potter first came out, I visited my I was visiting my grandmother in Southern Ontario, and she took me to the library. And I remember her asking, she's like, "Oh, I've heard from all my friends that all their grandchildren are reading this book, right?" So she's asking the librarian there, "Do you have a copy of whatever the first Harry Potter book is?" I don't remember. And of course they didn't. And that was when I decided to just, so she's like, "Oh, okay." So I'm wandering through the library and I discovered Patricia A. McKillop, who
Okay.
is to this day one of my favorite fantasy authors. And this is something else about fantasy too, is that fantasy and horror, we were talking about sci-fi horror earlier, but fantasy horror overlaps quite a lot as
Oh,
well. And I'm not saying
absolutely.
in her books, but her books are very fairy tale, but there's a lot of other authors who really do explore that. Well, especially like the weird tales era.
Right.
Clark Ashton Smith,
Who
H.P.
is
Lovecraft,
who I'll make a note right here
freaking
for
amazing.
listeners. Clark Ashton Smith is part of like the trio, right? You've got the
Yeah,
Lovecraft, Howard, and Clark Ashton
Smith.
Smith,
Yeah.
right? And he's my guy in the
Oh,
trio.
he's
Okay,
so and very underrated. Most people have read Robert E. Howard.
right.
Most people have read uh Lovecraft. Very few people have read Clark Ashton Smith, and I think that's criminal. And H.P. Lovecraft and Howard, I mean, if you read Solomon Kane, Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane stuff,
Right.
that's all adventure horror. It's
Right.
all about this Puritan guy in like the depths of Africa fighting these like evil monsters in horrific like temples and
Right, and that kind of stuff. I
weird
mean,
shit.
but
It's
ultimately,
bizarre, yeah.
when you look at Howard's body of work, right?
Yeah.
Um, his my favorite stuff from Howard is his horror stuff. There's a
Yeah.
anthology collection of like the horror of Robert E. Howard, and that has some of my favorite Howard stories that are not the Conan stuff. I mean, the horror from the Mound is one of my favorite short stories, and that's the one with the
Hmm.
vampire that was brought over by the conquistador ship and like
Yeah.
buried in Texas. And you've got Pigeons from Hell, which is this kind of weird southern zombie slave revolt thing going on. Um, and you have all this crazy stuff, and then of course Clark Arson Smith is all like just really insane Dunsanian kind of horror that is not
Yeah.
as exciting as Lovecraft stuff, but I don't know. I always prefer. But you know, here's the thing, right? Whenever I write
Hmm.
fantasy, and I've done this before, and I've actually had people call me out on it. They're always like,
Hmm.
"Alex, you started off writing a fantasy story, but it turned into a horror story." And I remember there's actually a review somewhere on
Well,
Amazon.
think of fairy tales. Fairy tales, the
Fairy tales are
originals,
fucking
are
horror.
scary as shit.
I mean, you're
Yeah.
this girl whose stepmother wants to kill and sends like a hunter after you, and then you
Hmm.
end up with a bunch of creeps in the forest, and then she comes and poisons you with an apple. Like, what the fuck, right? You know,
Yeah.
it's
Or
pretty
just
crazy.
the whole idea of fairies.
Right, terrifying.
Fairies aren't the cute butterfly people that we commonly see. They were actually fucking terrifying. Like the whole reason for a lot of Halloween traditions was to get fairies to fuck the hell off.
Right.
Like,
Don't eat their food,
um,
man.
yeah, leave food out for the brownies so that they don't like, I don't know, kill your cows or whatever, or poison your milk, whatever. Um, it's people um from these areas with these traditions, whether you call them fairies or little people or elves or dwarves or whatever the region calls them, there are like scary creatures. They're not supposed to be the nice, friendly, like Tinkerbell things that like Disneyfied
Right.
versions of fairies. So
Well,
fairy tales have always been fucking scary.
right, Jack Vance and Lioness and Mauduck and the Green
Yes, he
Pearl
does it really good.
does it
Yeah.
really well, and that's one that like, and I think okay, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about. I have no idea what the noise is. That goes back to like
Is that a
it goes.
dog?
It might be my dog trying to get in. I hope
I'm
it's a
actually
dog
surprised my dog isn't barking.
and
She's
not some kind of
been
creature
very
that wants to
quiet
kill
this
me.
whole time.
Well, to go back to the early beginning, where horror, there's a thin line between like pure fantasy and horror, right? I
Hmm.
mean, you think of Beowulf, right?
Yeah.
1 second, give me a second.
Hmm.
It's my dog trying to like open the door somewhere downstairs, and the microphone's picking it up, like through the vibrations of the floor. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like I can't hear it without my headphones on, but it gets picked up on the microphone because the gain is up. But yeah, think about some of the original like proto fantasy stories like Beowulf, right? The
Yep.
dragon is terrifying, right? The
Hmm.
mother, the chthonic entity that Beowulf fights.
Hmm.
There's a very thin line between the two, and I think one of the ways it becomes kind of mundane and loses the horror, the liminal aspect, is when it becomes explained, right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
when the vampire becomes the vampire, if
Hmm.
that makes sense, when it becomes like, easily knowable, easily understood, and easily defeated, right?
Hmm.
Once you're no longer afraid of it, give me 1 quick second. 1 second, I'm gonna go kill my vampire dog.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm back.
No worries.
She was trying to get inside the room. I thought my wife was home. She must have stepped out to the neighbor's house or something with my daughter.
No worries.
But yeah, back to vampires and stuff, right? When the
Hmm.
vampire becomes normal, it's no longer scary. It's no longer a monster. It's no longer
Hmm.
horror. It becomes the aliens and aliens, right?
Yeah.
We know what they are. We know what they do,
Yeah.
and you can shoot them.
Well, that's why vampires originally were frightening because those sorts of stories were coming from people not understanding what was happening in their real life. Like, there's speculations that vampires originated from people observing consumption, right? Like,
Right.
what's the actual word for consumption?
Tuberculosis.
Yes, thank you. People didn't understand that. We didn't have germ theory or nothing, so we didn't know what was happening to these people.
Right. And the
And so
whole
there's a lot of all the and the whole garlic thing, like we didn't know garlic was actually really good for you, but it's actually really good for you. So maybe we should be eating more garlic and staving off the vampires, you know what I mean?
right. And so I read somewhere, I read a quote, and I don't know if where I read it, but it stuck with me, and I like it. I use it kind of like a little heuristic, but it's one of those things where like I it's true 99% of the time, and you can apply 99% of the time. And there's one thing that I read that it says that every villain, every antagonist in almost every movie or every kind of like horror, even fantasy, even
Hmm.
is either a vampire or a werewolf, right? And
Yeah.
what it means by that, it means that what it's trying to say is that there's the vampire and then there's the werewolf. And the vampire is represents the whole concept of man taking advantage of all the like the power of civilization, right? Because the vampire
Hmm.
is a hyper intelligent, kind of viral, virulent individual that is more man than man and parasitical, and
Hmm.
it's a parasite on the the very existence of like society and
Yeah.
civilization. Like the vampire is an ill of civilization. You really can't have vampires in wild.
Hmm.
You know, give me another second. Jesus Christ. Sorry about that. My wife just got home and I had to let the dog out. I'm gonna edit that. All right.
No worries.
So let me give you a quick pause. All right. Yeah. So the vampire itself is a creature that is a parasitical upon civilization. You can't have the vampire out in the greater world. So
Hmm.
it's a villain that uses our best impulses, right? Whether it's sexuality, it's usually an attractive attractive villain, an
Hmm.
intellectual villain, an institutional villain like that uses the powers of money, wealth, sophistication against us.
Hmm.
While the werewolf is a character that is humanity debased, like
Yeah.
it's our most violent animalistic urges taken over, you know? And a good movie that you can look at to kind of illustrate that this is one of the best horror movies slash crime movies slash detective movies, and that's Silence of the Lambs, right?
Yeah.
Because Silence of the
Yeah.
Lambs is really the two villains.
I was just thinking as you were describing the vampire, and I'm thinking
Well,
the sound
Hannibal
what?
Lecter, and
100%.
those two movies are a pull. I mean, okay, look, Silence of the Lambs is Twilight, right? Because
I guess so.
in
Yeah.
Twilight, Bella had to choose between Edward and the werewolf kid or whatever his name
Hmm.
is, right? And in Silence of the Lambs, what's her name? Was it Starling, right? Has to choose between. Oh, interestingly enough, Bella means beautiful or beautiful one.
Hmm.
Starling is like a beautiful bird, right? It's like a
Hmm.
innocent bird. Has to choose between the vampire, the hyper intellectual Hannibal Lecter, who is basically uses he's wrapped in the trappings of hyper civilization. The man
Hmm.
himself is Count Dracula in a way, right?
Yeah.
And then a beast, a
Hmm.
transforming beast, right? Who literally wears people's skin and
Yeah.
he puts people in caves and does all kinds of weird bestial shit, right? In Buffalo
Hmm.
Bill, which he also names himself after an animal, Buffalo Bill,
Hmm.
right? So it's interesting. And if you look at almost every, movie or novel, you've got the vampire or the werewolf, right?
Yeah.
Alien, you could say that, okay, if you want to be more in depth and autistic about it, you can say that we have the vampire, the werewolf, and the alien,
Hmm.
right? Um, like the outsider, right? The alien outsider. But every bad guy movie, the movie Seven, is the movie Seven a horror movie or is it a detective movie?
Well, technically, Silence of the Lambs is a thriller also, and so
Right,
Seven would be a thriller.
right.
But
It's a horror
there's,
movie,
I am like, I think we can both agree on this too. Genre is pretty fucking meaningless. There are very horrific acts that occur in Seven, um, but because it's reasons. It's a thriller. I've never really understood the difference between thriller and horror, to be honest, but there is one, apparently, especially if you look at book sales. Thriller is like its own thing, and then horror. And thriller, for some reason, gets like the literary pass. Like there's a lot of agents that will take only literary or thriller. It's bizarre,
right?
but then horror doesn't. Horror is still relegated to like the schlocky genre shit, right?
I think you could say that it's the acceptance of the supernatural or not.
I think so. I think so. I think horror has more of the fantastical,
Right,
whereas thriller is like it could be a thriller about is my husband going to kill me? Like, I don't know, whatever. But yeah, so Seven is technically a thriller and Silence of the Lambs is technically a thriller, but there are also very horrific things that occur.
right.
Like to me, um, I would watch Silence of the Lambs on Halloween. Why
Oh
not?
yeah. I mean, it's a
The
total
whole
Halloween
idea,
movie.
I mean, the Buffalo Bill himself was inspired by Ted Bundy. And that shit's horrifying. You know, you think you're being really, really nice, helping a guy move his couch or whatever, and then he's knocking you out and putting you down a fucking well. Like that's pretty scary, you know?
Right. And you know what is interesting about Silence of the Lambs is that
Hmm.
one thing I've noticed about horror, or the frightful, the terror-inducing, is that often when you're writing it, you're writing about kind of a key element in a way, is that we have a character in a liminal space that's displaced, right?
Hmm.
Because ultimately we are defined by our places and our roles.
Yeah.
And as you enter the horror mode, the horror motif, that character becomes more and more displaced, right? It
Hmm.
leaves that, it goes through that transitionary period. And if you look at Silence of the Lambs, Agent Starling, she comes in and she has a place. She is the super agent, fresh out of
Yeah.
Langley. She's ready to go, FBI school or whatever. And she's the best of the best. And she slowly becomes displaced by her acceptance of Hannibal Lecter and by her
Hmm.
interactions with Buffalo Bill. And she becomes more vampiric herself. And
Yeah.
she starts questioning, where she fits into this role. And she starts really seeing how much more of a of a Hannibal Lecter character she is herself, and starts sympathizing with, Hannibal Lecter, which makes it fascinating all around. But there's the whole thing of desperation, and you get that in Seven also, right? The
Yeah.
characters completely lose their grip on reality
Yeah.
the deeper they get into the sins, and ultimately, Seven is about a hypernatural, biblical kind of theme type of
Hmm.
situation where they're fighting a werewolf, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what he is. He's a werewolf.
And if you think about Psycho too,
He's a werewolf.
total werewolf. Yeah.
Jason's a werewolf, and so
Hmm.
is, in a way, Freddy Krueger is a werewolf.
Hmm.
A lot of the monsters are werewolves. There's
Hmm.
vampires tend to be more like shady government agencies,
Yeah.
sinister kind of monsters. Like I
Hmm.
like vampires, okay, because I was into goth music and goth stuff, and I loved Anne Rice. Have you ever read any Anne Rice stuff?
Um, I remember trying to read Interview with the Vampire, but I think I was too young. I do plan on reading it though as an adult. I really do.
Uh,
Interview with the Vampire has always been one of my favorite movies,
it's one of my
the
favorite
original.
movies too. Yeah.
I never saw the sequel. I don't know. There was something about it at the time that I'm just like, I'll pass.
No,
But the original
Lestat
adaptation
has to
was
be
really good.
Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise was the
Yeah.
perfect Lestat. And people will
Because
argue
he looks so gross. Like it's so perfect.
because he's a vampire himself. He's a villain
Maybe
himself.
that's why it is so perfect. Is that
Because
you're trying to
a
grow me.
vampire ultimately has no soul, and Tom
Yeah.
Cruise hasn't aged a day since he filmed
Yeah.
that movie,
Yeah,
because he's
exactly.
a vampire. And one thing about vampires that I find interesting is that they're sexual beings that are asexual,
Hmm.
right?
Um,
Their whole sexuality is fake, right?
yeah.
They're so sexual, but they're not having sex. Why? Because they
Yeah.
can't, because they're corpses,
Yeah.
right? So in a way, vampires are ultimate spiritual pornography.
Hmm.
They're really, when you think about it, vampires are some of the most horrible things in existence ever created, if done properly, right? Not because they're monsters. You tend to have kind of a chud sci-fi fantasy like response to the Twilight vampires by making vampires like the 28 Day Later, like kind of monstrous vampires, right? But the monstrous
Hmm.
vampires are equally unscary, right?
Yeah.
They're just like the Edward vampire in Twilight. They're not scary. The
Hmm.
scariest vampire is Tom Cruise as as Lestat. Why?
Hmm.
Because you want to be him, but he's a miserable fuck. He's
Hmm.
literally damned. He has no he's this completely sexual, sexy being that probably can't get it up because he's dead. So
Hmm.
everything they do is fake. They go through the motions of living like they're like a mockery of life, you know?
Yeah.
And the fact that they're so beautiful and attractive and everything, they're at the same time they're incapable of doing any of the normal things, and that to me is horrifying because
Hmm.
it's like the whole idea of the uncanny, that concept of something that looks human but is not human, or something that their entire existence they're like theatrical and everything, but deep down they're fake and empty,
Hmm.
and they know it, and you know it, and they're in constant miserable damnation, right?
Yeah.
So you can't have vampires without Christianity, or at least some sort of like higher power type of thing that damns them,
Hmm.
and you can't have them be cool because deep down they're parasites.
I think if you look at Asian horror, like Japanese horror,
Hmm.
there are entities that are very similar to the Western vampire, but like they're, slightly different. They're a little bit more Japanese. I'm not super up on my Asian horror, but I did go through a phase where like one of the few horror movies that legitimately scared me was The Ring,
Right, The Ring was great.
right? Really, really freaking good. And then there was like Audition and a bunch of those. Um, I'm not up to date on my Asian horror, but Japan has its own culture with that. And they do have what do they call them? I don't remember what they're called, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but they do have their own like culture of um demons and all that stuff, and some of them are like soul eaters and all that stuff. So different cultures have different types of vampiric beasts, but
Right.
they're not exactly one to one.
I know there's like a Chinese one where like the head comes off and like floats around and stuff, and then it's got all kinds of weird shit like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Japanese horror does tend to lean towards the werewolf in a way.
Hmm.
Where and I think that, and by what I mean is that it tends to lean towards the hyper violent, explosive, like gore kind of violence in a
Hmm.
lot of their media. And I think that's because their day-to-day culture is very buttoned down and normal
Yeah.
and like very pleasant and suit wearing, and they're lined up properly in trains. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden something fucking explodes, right?
Yeah.
The weird
I think
comes through and it's like a
that is what
werewolf.
is really appealing to a lot of people about horror is that it's able to explore these fucking like weird there's so much absurdity in our day-to-day lives, and you can examine it through horror, which a lot of people, that's why people get attracted to that sort of thing, is that like they can safely explore like um what if something fucking weird did happen on the train today? Even
Right.
though I do that every single day, why do I even do it every single day? Like, is there a reason? Like, what am I doing? And so, like, you can explore it in kind of like a more absurd
Yeah, kind
kind
of
of comedy.
extreme. Right.
Comedy and horror are basically two sides of the same coin.
I agree.
Both of
You
them
know
are
that.
forms of examination, but done in like different ways. One involves maybe, unless it's a comedy horror, like, Shaun of the Dead or something, but like zombie movies, actually, speaking of Shaun of the Dead, zombie movies are the perfect cultural examination. Especially if you think of like the George A. Romero
Right.
horror movies. They're pure social, I almost want to say satire, but with death and horror and gore and all that stuff. Especially the Dawn of the Dead, where it's in the mall, like that is a pure critique of
Of Reagan,
American
yeah, of
consumer
Reagan era
culture.
economics, right? And
Yeah.
then, I mean, look, we're both like late 30s, mid 30s to 40s, right?
Mhm.
So we grew up through the zombie era,
Yeah.
right? Where,
Yeah, it had a really significant revival around the time when I was in film school. So like several of the student films that I was in, I was playing a zombie. Like that was like peak zombie time was
right,
mid 2000s.
mid
Yeah.
2000s, around 2010 specifically, it was
Yeah.
zombie everything. There was the
Yeah.
era when The Walking Dead came out on TV. Every movie was a zombie movie. DayZ,
What, and you have to wonder like what was going on, because malls were already dying.
well,
The
so
consumer culture was already on its like, it was changing though. It was changing. So there was the Iraq War, Afghanistan, post 9/11. It was it maybe were people thinking about what could happen post 9/11?
Well, no. So
I don't know.
what
It's
I
weird, eh?
think, I think where that came from, right? Or
Hmm.
I think is that after around the 2010 era, I think this culture was stagnated and dead, and it's been dead since then, right? But
Hmm.
culture at that time was fully stagnated. This was the era of reality TV, everything, Snooki, everything.
Yeah.
It was the era of like full, complete like corporate domination of everything, right? And that's the
Was the zombie movie maybe wish fulfillment?
well, when it was
Perhaps.
wish fulfillment, right? I mean, what is the zombie, the whole obsession with like, remember they were doing zombie walks every freaking, Halloween
Yep.
in every city, like LA had zombie walks, New York had zombie walks, every city had
Hmm.
zombie walks,
Even
and
up here. Yeah.
people were selling like, zombie survival guides. And the fantasy was the apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to live in the apocalypse and go off the
Mhm.
grid and stuff. And in a way, I think it was a deep-seated, oh, well, what's the word for it? Uh, disaffection with
Hmm.
the whole, with the whole like the way society is, the stagnation of culture, and people wanted to restart. People wanted the danger of living out in a tent somewhere with the,
Hmm.
the enemy out there. Of course, in everybody's fantasy, they're not the zombie. They're the guy.
No,
You
they
know,
survive. Yeah.
when
No,
the
I would totally
reality
die.
is you're the fucking zombie,
Yeah.
and you're gonna.
I'm slow. I don't do enough cardio. I'm not a fast runner. I was always last getting picked for school sports. I would totally be dead. The
But
only thing that would save me is that if I was lucky enough to get out in the bush, I was also with a lot of my friends who are very like up here we're very isolated. I actually started a story, and maybe I should revisit this. If a zombie apocalypse happened, I'm about an hour away from the Canada US border.
Would you go
So
south?
there would be a lot of Americans trying to come north to escape to the Canadian wilderness to get away from it. So what would the people here in my town be doing about all these Americans crossing the border? So I had this like idea in my head that I played with for a while. I never really did anything with it. Maybe I
You'd
should.
shoot us. You'd shoot us, right?
Um,
Oh, you guys don't have
we
any
have we
guns.
we
Ha
have more
ha
guns
ha.
than you think.
Yeah,
We have
yeah.
not as many as Americans, but we do have more guns than you think. But yeah, so basically the biggest threat to us here, because we're so isolated, like as far as Canada goes, the next nearest town in either direction is 8 or 9 hours. We're very
Yeah.
isolated. So the only our biggest threat would be Americans coming north.
Right, it's true. It'd be American zombies. I mean, and isn't
Yeah,
that what's going on anyways? Your entire culture is subsumed by American zombie culture,
that's exactly right. Most of the lovely horror movies that you know,
right?
especially like the made for TV ones, they're all filmed in Canada.
You guys probably
Everybody,
know,
everybody that I know who's stuck with the film industry, they either do horror movies, made for TV like Hallmark movies, or they do sci-fi,
right? And
like
then
those cheap sci-fi movies. Yeah.
that's the problem with being on the periphery of the empire in a way is that I
Yeah.
guarantee you that if you ask 100 Canadians who the president of the United States is, they'll tell you. Well, if you ask
Mhm.
100 Americans, only about 10 of them will name the prime
Oh my gosh.
minister of the U.S.,
Uh,
right?
so this is totally unrelated to the main topic, but like for those that aren't aware listening, I was recently visiting the States. I did a little bit of a road trip. And when I'm on the podcast, I do try to speak a little bit more clearly than I do when I'm speaking with my family. And nothing makes you more aware that you actually do have a rather thick accent is when people kind of look at you and they kind of like furrow their brow a little bit and they're like, "What the fuck are you saying?" So there was these guys behind us in line, and I heard them say like, "What corner of America are they from?" All their words just kind of like run together, and just like laughing my ass off. It's like, yep. Well, for one, we're not American, but for two, yep, we do have an accent.
That's
Anyway,
funny
it's
because
totally unrelated.
on a podcast, I don't feel like you have an accent at all. I was
Yeah,
expecting one, and I think we've joked about it in the past, and Fista's joked about it.
there's some words that I know if people with keen ears can probably really tell. Like about, I don't say boot. That's like the stereotype, but there is a way that I say about that isn't American.
Yeah.
Or car is another one.
I say a lot of words wrong, but that's because I'm
Mhm.
retarded.
Yeah,
That's
I read a lot of words, but I don't
yeah.
usually say a lot of the words
That's
out loud,
mostly
right?
because
Yeah.
I English is my second language is my excuse, all right? Which is a really
My
shitty
excuse is that I am just retarded. Like
yeah,
English is my
which is a
first language.
shitty
I understand.
excuse because I literally moved to the United States when I was like 6 and a half, and English is basically my native language, you know? But
Hmm.
I always say that, like when my wife makes fun of one of my Alexisms that I have. She's like, dude, what the hell? Like, why do you say that
Hmm.
wrong? And I'm like, I don't know. It's because I learned it wrong when I was 7, so it's stuck.
Yeah.
Which is a lie. I'm just retarded. It's just I have a I don't know how to spell anything. Like I'm
Yeah.
just like
Spelling's a tough one too.
right.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like that is a zombie thing, and the zombie thing is dead. It's gone away,
Hmm.
right? What's our horror thing now? What is our contemporary
Well,
horror craze?
you would think, and it's funny. Here I am talking about my own books again, but you would think that there would be more um body horror out now because of COVID, but there's
Right.
actually not been a whole lot. Palace, I thought of that whole idea before COVID. I already had that, but you'd think that there would be more. And body horror is actually one of my personal, other than folk horror,
It's one
body
of your
horror
favorites
is one of my favorites. And this is why. So
because you're a woman.
because I'm a woman, but also I have OCD. And
Right.
one of my big fears is like contamination issues and stuff like that. So if we're ever at a restaurant, okay, have you ever seen Aviator? That is
Mm,
like the best example of what living with OCD is like. That's fucking perfect. Anyway, so because I have this in my brain, um, IRL all the time, when it watching or reading body horror is actually really cathartic. I'm able to like process like one of my speaking of novels, I'm jumping around so much right now, and I apologize, but one of my favorite more recent I actually loaded up the Goodreads page because I couldn't remember what year it came out, 2014, so fairly recent. It's called The Troop by Nick Cutter.
Okay, I've never read that.
Anybody,
I'm
if
familiar with
anybody
it, but I've never
here,
read it.
if anybody listening is into body horror, it is a fucking phenomenal read. So it's about this, and again, liminal, like these kids aren't, this isn't where they're from. It's like a Boy Scout troop out on this island out in uh I think it's what does it say? It just says Canadian wilderness, but I think it's an island near Prince Edward Island, so it's right off the coast, the Atlantic coast. Um, and it is so gross. And there are some parts of the book where, and these are like 11, 12-year-old, 13-year-old boys that are struggling with what the fuck is going on. Um, I don't know how much I should explain because I don't want to spoil it. But there are some scenes where I have actually had these thoughts where I just literally want to like tear my own skin off. And it's been brutal. And then so when I'm reading these like horrific descriptions of like that actually happening, it's like, okay, well, that's pretty cool. I'm not actually going to do that. You know what I mean? But yeah, so body horror is a big one for me because it is cathartic. Um, and that's another thing with horror too, is that the enemy isn't always the thing that we can see. So if you're talking about vampires and werewolves, I would say that a villain like what's in the troop would be like a microscopic werewolf.
Right. It's internal in
It's
a way.
internal and
Right.
it's disgusting. Yeah.
Right. And so,
Don't read that book if you're squeamish.
so
I
with
don't usually get squeamish at stuff like that, but that book made me squeamish.
I'm
So
gonna have
I
to read that
highly
one.
recommend that one.
That one's been on my radar for a while. That sounds
Yeah.
lame. I hate people that say that. I
Yeah.
I
I
have
say that all the time too.
I think that in a way, horror itself as a genre tends to be very reactionary in its nature. It tends to be a very, I would say, right wing kind of thing because it is dealing with rejecting an outsider or the norm,
Yeah.
the norm kind of like, ultimately
Hmm.
you look at vampire fiction like Dracula itself, and Dracula is a very conservative story because it's about
Hmm.
a bunch of, merchant like, insurance salesmen who what it really touches down is a masculine fear of being cucked, right?
Hmm.
That's what Dracula is about. The foreigners coming and stealing their women, right?
Hmm.
He's cooler than them. He's the count, right? He comes and he
Hmm.
steals Mina Harker and Lucy and everything. And I joked about that, but that is kind of at the core of what the vampire thing is, right? You're afraid of somebody cooler than you seducing away your women, right?
Hmm.
And then, or the outsider, the crazy, the element of psychosis in your tribe, the werewolf, right? The guy that like we've sent away to the woods, right? Now he's dangerous. He's going to hurt us, the maniac, right? So it is very much dealing with a reactionary right wing kind of thing, with
Yeah.
the exception of body horror. Body horror tends to be a very left wing kind of mindset to horror.
There's
And
also like a environmental horror as well. And I'm thinking of zombie, this whole zombie plague thing that could be construed as an environmental horror issue. The
right.
birds, like why are the birds pissed off? Is it because of what humans are doing to nature? Whatever, right?
Right, but that's still a very
Yeah.
conservative kind of thought process. Is
Yeah.
like you're righting a wrong and that kind of thing, right? That
Hmm.
a lot of, I mean, okay, a lot of horror tends to be about violating taboos, right?
Yeah.
Like shit happens because you broke a tradition that shouldn't have not been broken, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Poltergeist, right? You
Yeah.
fucked with burial grounds. The
That's right.
Shining, you fucked with burial grounds.
Hmm.
You broke a sexual taboo, and now you're getting murdered, right? So it's
Yeah.
very reactionary, but body horror, and you see this a lot. a lot of times in a lot of popular body horror, the writer is tends to be like a trans kind of guy or something, because it is a very progressive mindset where you're afraid of your own body, right? Where you're denying what your body is, and your body is your enemy in a way, right? So you do see a lot of left wing kind of coded body horror, uh,
I
or
can see that.
or
I can
feminine
see that.
coded. And I say feminine coded because females interact, and this is, presupposition on my part as a male, but
Mhm.
males don't think of their bodies at all, really, right? We don't, right? Because we are not affected by our bodies as much until we
Yeah.
age, until we're old,
Yeah.
right? But women, you guys get slapped with that period, like right in your teen years, like
Yeah,
you
it sucks.
you get to see, you feel the body horror,
Yeah.
right from the beginning. And then I didn't think about this until my wife was pregnant, but then you have a creature growing inside of you,
It's literally like, do you recall, okay, when she was pregnant and seeing
the
the
feet
baby's feet?
kick, yeah,
Yeah.
or the head like rubbing against it and stuff,
Yeah.
and it doing backflips in there.
I remember the feeling of the baby's fingernails.
Right. That
And
has to be.
and like I can't even describe that satisfyingly to anybody who's never been pregnant,
Right.
right? Like
That
it's
has to
fucking
be.
horrifying in a way. Yeah.
In a way, it's the most beautiful thing ever, but it's in a way is the
Yeah.
most terrifying, most disgusting
Yeah.
thing when you think about it, And then it comes
Let
out.
me
It,
out.
it
Yeah.
doesn't come out cleanly. It doesn't open the door and go, hey, it comes out in blood, shit, piss, and like, all
Yeah.
kinds of fluids. And
It's beautiful, isn't it?
it's a horrendous sight. It is a beautiful
Yeah.
sight, but it is nonetheless a liminal. It's not a polite
Oh, talk
entrance,
about a
all
liminal
right?
place. The
Yeah.
birth, the
Oh
giving
yeah.
birth is like the
The
most liminal experience other than fucking dying.
Right, exactly. Birth and
And
death, right?
oftentimes throughout history, they were the
The
exact
same
same
thing.
bed.
Yeah, they're same place, right? The
Yeah.
same place, and often at the same time, right? And it's just, yeah, there is a nothing, okay, like nothing in the male experience, right, is going to kill my body's not going to kill me. Something I naturally do with my body is not going to kill me, right?
Hmm.
But pregnancy can kill you,
Hmm.
right? So in a way, it can be your enemy, right?
Yeah.
There's never any like the male sexual act is putting out things, right? It's
Yeah.
releasing things. Well, female is receiving and taking stuff
Hmm.
in. So the sexual act does not change a male in a way,
Hmm.
right? Because it's like a deposit, right? But the sexual act for females is taken in, which can change you permanently because you can get pregnant and all that stuff, right?
Hmm.
So I understand why the body horror tends to be really popular with women compared to
I
men.
can see that. I've never actually really thought of it as being a female thing, but I totally get it. Especially, well, I mean, obviously, I am a woman, but my connection to body horror is more of like a mental thing.
Right.
Um, it's one of those like ways to process the shit that I experienced in my stupid fucking brain. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know. And then you think of like, so the king of body horror, of course, is Cronenberg.
Right.
And you think of The Fly, if you think of Videodrome, if you think of The Brood, yeah, I can see that. I can see that being have you seen The Brood?
I have seen The Brood, yeah. And The Fly
Yeah.
is one of my favorite horror movies also.
Oh, The Fly is freaking
And to this day, I have
phenomenal.
nightmares about my teeth falling out, like that scene when he looks in the mirror.
Well, okay, so for me, it's are they just finishing or they're about to, and her hand goes up his back and feels the fly hairs on his back. Ugh. It's just so gross. Fuck. So, and then the end of the movie, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I can see where you're coming from a lot.
Right.
Especially, well, I think it's pretty obvious why women are into true crime because it's like how not to fucking get murdered,
Right,
like
because
we're always watching this shit being, yeah,
you
we're
tend to be
more
the
at risk.
victim. You tend to be
Yeah.
the victim of it.
Hmm.
And in the same way, I've noticed, and this is what do you call it? What's the word for it? Not documented fact, but like, from personal experience, right? I forgot what the word for it is. Circumstantial evidence or personal
Hmm.
evidence or whatever.
Anecdotal.
Anecdotal, yeah, anecdotal is the word for it. I've noticed that women tend to really like torture movies a lot more than dudes do. Like my wife likes horror movies, and she likes movies that or books where like somebody's put in like a fucking basement somewhere and tortured,
Hmm.
or she likes that movie like Funny Games, which I can't watch it. It disgusts
I
me.
haven't seen that one. I know the movie,
And
what you're talking about, but I haven't
she
seen
likes those kind of movies. Like she tends
it.
to
Mhm.
like slasher movies. She likes the Rob Zombie stuff, which I can't stand.
Oh,
Uh,
wait, Funny Games is the guy, they're wearing the masks and then
Take over
is that
that
the one?
house. Yeah,
Yes, I have seen that one. Actually, I
yeah.
did.
I
Yeah.
hate that movie with a fucking passion. She loves that movie. There's two versions of it, like an European version and an American version.
Yeah,
They
same with that happens a lot
Yeah, they remake
with
the horror
horror.
movies. Yeah,
Yeah, there's VHS, which is originally Spanish, and then they remade it in English.
I mean, The
Even
Ring
The
and all
Ring.
that stuff,
Yeah.
right?
The Grudge
The
is another
Grudge.
Asian horror movie. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, ultimately, like it seems that women, like if you look at a lot of these thrillers or like crime kind of books, my wife reads a lot of those and she listens to a lot of them audiobook. And whenever I catch them or I
Hmm.
read this, it's always like some fucking person getting kidnapped and shoved in a basement somewhere and tortured, which
Hmm.
tends not to be a male fear at all. It tends not
No.
to be something that men
Yeah.
are attracted to, and it doesn't tend to like affect us in a way. So I tend to avoid it for that reason.
Yeah.
And I think that has to do something with the uniquely the psyche of women at a more
Yeah.
vulnerable position.
I
And
think if I were to pick a subgenre of horror that would appeal more to men would be survival horror,
right, right,
which is kind of adjacent to zombie, kind
right,
of. But
right.
it doesn't have to involve zombies. It can just be
Like a
environmental, just trying to survive the night,
well,
whatever.
Dan Simmons's book, the one on the ship, right?
The
The
Terror.
terror, right?
I was thinking Assault on Precinct 13 is another one.
Right, that level of
Um,
by yourself, kind of stuck.
yeah.
Predator is a good example of another.
Fending things off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fending things off
Yeah.
that are powerful and
Yeah.
being like emasculated by them or emasculated by the circumstances is a
Hmm.
male horror. Uh, well, yeah, and that's interesting because it does touch into on like the deeper levels of that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Men don't tend to be very much into like medical horror, which women tend to be because, all the kind of I think abuses in like the OBGYN kind of world of being at the hands of doctors
Yeah,
and
it
that
can
kind of
happen.
stuff, which tends not to be something that men are that
Yeah.
afraid of because
Women,
I'll hop out of bed and fucking beat you ass up.
yeah.
Women tend to
Yeah.
not
We
fall
tend to
for it.
be, what do they call that these days? I've been seeing this on like places like Instagram all the time. Medical gaslighting is the word,
Right,
where
gaslighted.
we're just told that we just have anxiety, go drink some water, lose a couple pounds and lie down. Meanwhile, we have like, some sort of horrific
Right.
problem,
Like
you know, and it's just
you
like,
have a
ah,
chest
whatever, you're
burst.
just anxious.
You
Yeah.
were literally impregnated by a xenomorph and you have a chest burster growing in your
Yeah,
chest.
go lie
And it's
down.
yeah,
Yeah.
go should walk it off. Here's some
Yeah.
fucking Midol. It's
Yeah.
probably you're probably having a rough period this month. And that's
Yeah.
true. And I've worked in medical most of my life and I've seen
Hmm.
that, unfortunately.
Hmm.
And I mean, shit. I mean, women are given hormone medications that literally changes your thought process and the way
Yeah.
interact with the world. So there is a thing
Oh,
to it, which
it's brutal.
men don't encounter, so much.
Hmm.
So I tend to think that there is different modes of horror between male and female, and you do really
Hmm.
see that. I did try to read some recent horror. I read the one with the the Native American like deer monster that kills all the
Oh, Only Good Indians.
only good Indians. I fucking hated that
Yeah.
one. Okay, listen, all right.
I DNF'd that one too. I thought it was really interesting. It had some really cool concepts. But again, it came down to the author's voice. I just wasn't into it.
You know what? What's
Um,
funny is I started that one and I actually really liked the first few chapters. I liked it up until maybe the middle of the book. And I was like,
I actually read probably about 75% of it. I
yeah, I
read
was like,
pretty far
man,
into it.
this guy, he's got it. He's taking these Native American dudes, living
Mhm.
on a reservation. They're all bums, and they're dealing with like the real problems of reservation life, which I have no experience with because where I
Well, that's probably why I just did read it, was because like
because you have more.
I live in a like my kids take Ojibwe in school, right? So even though we aren't native, but we live in a community where the percentage of people are that who are native or Métis or indigenous in whatever ways is
First
very, very
Nations
high.
or
So
whatever you guys call them up
First
there.
Nations, yeah. Um, Half my friends are all at least a little bit native, so it's far more prescient here.
Right. And
So
we
I
don't
gave
we
it a
don't
try,
get
and
that where I grew up.
I
Yeah.
did. I thought it was really cool, and I do know people who have struggled with that identity thing, and that's another way that horror can help us process things is that we struggle with.
Right. Right.
There's been a lot of recent. I haven't read them, and I can't think of their names off the top of my head. Well, there was that Jordan Peele has been
Oh
doing a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
those
yeah,
sorts of
yeah.
like kind of analyzing
Race relations
race
and
really Candy going
interactions.
all the way back to Candyman.
Right. I mean,
Even.
yeah, Candyman was great. That
Yeah.
used to terrify me. I actually,
Yeah,
I'll
I
tell you,
loved Candyman when I
me
was younger.
too. And when
Yeah.
I lived in Chicago for a while, I actually wanted to go to Cabrini Green and see the building, like
Hmm.
the Candyman building, but they
Yeah.
tore it down before I moved there. I didn't know that. They
Yeah.
actually tore down those projects
Hmm.
around the 2000s or
Pretty,
late 90s.
yeah. Yeah,
So they're
late
not there
90s, I think.
anymore. They're not there.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, the whole Only Good Indians, it started off really cool. It had a great concept, and then it falls apart in the last quarter of the book because it becomes absolutely retarded. Right? Like you're like, okay, so the deer spirit is mad because you shot it, and now it wants to kill you.
Yeah, there was
And
something that I was like
then
kind
it
of
then it
confused
comes and
too.
plays basketball with his daughter.
Yeah, it's yeah.
It's just like what like when the monster comes and it's playing basketball, it's like balling on the court with the
Mhm.
daughter. I'm like, this is the fucking stupidest thing I've ever read, you know?
I'm trying to remember the name of the author. Stephen Graham Jones,
Yeah,
I think.
he blocked
Yeah.
me on Twitter back in
Oh
the day
no.
for some reason. I don't know why. I didn't do anything
What'd
with
you
him.
do?
I don't even know. I think I was on a block list or something. Probably because I was like following somebody that was like, I don't know, you know? And these guys are using block lists, and I was like, cool, man. Like, thanks for blocking me. I even like chatted with him a few times, you know, and he was cool, and
Oh
then he
yeah.
like blocked me. So I'm like, fuck you. I don't care. Your book sucked anyways, dude. You know? Fucking deer, fucking balling with the just shut the fuck up, you know? There was
Yeah.
a
I actually forgot
anthology
about that
there was
scene.
an anthology book called Goblin that I really liked, actually. Have you heard that one?
Goblin.
It's called Goblin, and
No.
it's by Josh Mallerman. He writes a bunch of other stuff too, and I really enjoy
Yes, he
it.
wrote Bird Box.
Yeah, he wrote Bird Box, right? He
Yeah.
wrote and Goblin is like really an homage to like the Creep Show, Tales from the Crypt kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's really like five or six like it's six novellas tied
Hmm.
together in this little town called Goblin, and it's very much like Tales from the Crypt, you know. And
Yeah.
it's each one's a little Tales from the Crypt kind of mini story that kind of ties into the greater story. I liked
Hmm.
it. It was pretty cool. But for the most part, everything's crap. But hey, Lisa, we gotta get going. Been on for 2 hours.
Alrighty.
Sorry about the dog. The dog. I should start giving the
No worries.
credit to the
I have
dog.
pets as well. In fact, you can probably hear my cats are playing with I don't know what that is over there. I don't know if you can hear them knocking it around on the
Something.
floor.
Yeah. What is your favorite all time horror movie? What is your favorite before we go?
Ooh, before we go, what is my favorite all-time horror movie? Um, well, like I said, I recently rewatched Wicker Man. That's up there. That's
Okay.
up there. That's one of my favorites.
I'll take that. We'll take that.
Um, gosh,
I like Event Horizon.
The Thing. What's really interesting about The Thing, when I first watched it when I was a teenager, I didn't like it, but it has really grown on me, and it's one of my favorite horror movies now.
The
So The
John
Thing,
Carpenter version.
yeah. So The Thing is up there. Wicker Man is up there. Who? The Fly. We were just talking about that one. Gosh, there's so many. There's a lot I could
I
name.
made my daughter watch The Thing when she was like 5, and like
Yeah, that was probably too young for her to get it.
she was like, "This movie's
That's yeah,
stupid." She's like, "It
yeah.
looks dumb," and like when the whole alien.
Rewatch it when she's like about 17 or something.
Yeah, when
Rewatch
that
it.
the whole scene with like the all the dogs are all a big mess of the
Yeah,
weird like liminal thing where it's like fucking tentacles and shit hanging out. And she's like, "That looks
yeah.
stupid." I'm like, "Damn it, don't be like this."
Has she seen? Now this is horror adjacent. It's not pure horror, but apparently a lot of kids get freaked out. And I loved this movie when I was a kid, and it's still one of my favorites. Return to Oz.
No, no, but
Have you seen that one?
that has one of my dream girls in it, as a little kid.
Fear a Bulk.
Frozen
Yeah,
Balk.
yeah.
I'm always like,
Well, I remember watching The Craft,
I
and
love
I
the
was like
craft.
right at the perfect age, and I'm like, oh, I want to be Feruza Bulk.
Like, yeah,
Oh,
me
he's
too.
so
Well,
cool
I
and
wanted her to be my
evil.
I
Yeah,
didn't want to be her. I wanted her to be my girlfriend,
yeah,
but, and then, that's why I'm damaged. But, that's
yeah.
cool,
Well, so
right?
is she, so don't worry about
Or like
it.
her in American History X is the other one. You're
Yeah.
like, um, but yeah, like yeah, that hurts good. There's always like the fucking what's the David Bowie one, the Dark Crystal,
Labyrinth. There's
Labyrinth, the
Labyrinth and
Dark
there's Dark
Crystal.
Crystal.
Those are all kind of crazy
Um,
ones. You know
yeah.
what movie I really like? That's a kids movie that I really love.
Mm.
Coraline,
That one's a really good one. Yeah, that one's
right?
a really good one. There's here's the what's really frustrating for me personally is that so many people in let's say funding positions, like so like producers, executive, like whatever the fuck, they don't give kids enough credit. And so there's a lot of like, I don't know what happened in the 80s where they allowed all these like darker fantasy films to come out. But
Right,
kids actually love dark shit. They
right,
love it.
right.
Um, it's like, I mean, thinking of Return to Oz, that could never be made now.
No,
Everybody's like, oh no, you can't scare the children. Kids love being scared. Why do you
well,
think they ask for ghost stories at bedtime? They love it.
right. My
My
daughter
kids,
loves horror, everything.
yeah,
She loves horror, everything. And we'll end it here. And that's such a great observation because kids are in liminal space. Everything
yeah,
to them is a place
scary.
of
Everything is scary,
non-belonging, right? Everything is
right?
scary. And they need to process that. And if
Yeah.
you dumb it down, they look at these dumb media and they don't like it
Mhm.
because it's not real. It's not truthful.
I think that's one of the problems like that you were talking about really early on about what Halloween's turned into. Like, if a little girl wants to dress up as like a princess, like I'm not going to tell them, no, you can't do that. That's not scary, right? But there's a lot of people who don't think of Halloween as a scary holiday anymore. It's just a dress up holiday, right? And so it's like there's different it's lost a lot of that what it's originally about.
Right? It's
And like my
become
kids don't my kids don't dress up as something scary every single year.
right.
The costumes are just really really fun for us. Um but yeah, it's different. It's changed
It's
with the
supposed to be a
holidays.
holiday where you're like, let your kids dress up as some kind of creature and let them
Yeah.
go out on the street by themselves. And usually they probably can't go by themselves, but because they're with like all their friends and everybody's on the street, let them get
Mhm.
them razor blade apples, and the poison candy or
Yeah.
whatever. And if they die, they die,
Yeah, Halloween
you know?
Halloween is definitely more scary for parents these days.
Yeah, than it is for kids.
Well,
Yeah.
than it is for kids, yeah.
Right, no, absolutely, right? Like, you know what? Just go get the razor blade apples. Get it, get whatever like
You know,
Quaaludes or whatever you're getting.
never mind the fact that like every single one of these cases are totally fake. Like
Well,
it's
yeah,
literally never happened. It's
because
never happened.
it is the horror of horror in a way, right?
Yeah.
It's like the biggest fear, right?
Yeah.
Which is why, I found the like Alexander Helene said that Song of Cali by Dan Simmons is one of the scariest novels we've both ever read because
Mhm.
it deals with your child getting killed,
Yeah.
in India, which is double terrifying because you're out of the norm and you're
Hmm.
experiencing like the worst thing ever for a parent. All right,
Hmm.
Lisa, thank you for
Yeah.
coming on, man. It's always a
No
pleasure.
problem.
We'll
Yeah.
chat probably tomorrow for sure offline. This
Sure.
episode will be released on the 31st. So when you're listening to this, it'll probably be Halloween. You're probably gonna listen to this on the 1st of November with hopefully a candy hangover. If you actually no, none of my adult listeners are gonna have candy. Well, I'm going to.
No, I definitely
Yeah.
I
I'm
definitely
probably
take my tax from their candy
Yeah,
bags. I have no shame at
I'm
all.
probably gonna be barfing candy all day on Friday.
Yeah.
It's just how
Yeah.
it is. But I hope you guys enjoy it. In the comments, please like and subscribe. Tell me about your favorite horror novels and your favorite horror movies. I really care about that. We're going to talk about horror themed music, which is a lot. I mean, we can talk about that for hours, like, like the Misfits and tons of horror pops and all this different, like, kind of like, kind of satanic metal type of stuff where it combines like metal music with like Satanism and all kinds of morbid stuff and, fantasy and all that shit. But, we didn't get around to it. But we can talk about horror music, horror movies, horror everything. I think it's ultimately a fantastic genre. I don't like to think of it as a genre as much as an overlay to regular and at its best. I'm like I said, once again, I'm a believer that the best novels, the best films don't fit into a genre. They take the best of everything and combine it and make it something new, like Silence of the Lambs. Like, I feel like that's an ideal kind of situation. But I hope you guys all enjoyed this episode. Please like, subscribe here on Substack, over on YouTube, over on Spotify, Apple Music, and good night.
Happy Halloween!